even as recently as last week, I mean, with the coup that occurred in Myanmar, I mean, those sort of parallel elected government officials that can't take their seats because of the military there we were on a call with them and talking about the situation there. I mean, that's so it would have been inconceivable in any other circumstance. So it's no, I think they will definitely be advantaged. Peut-être je dois juste vérifier si les interprètes ont reçu mes notes bilingues pour aujourd'hui. I imagine the interpreters have got the notes and everything for our remarks.
They did, yes. Good. They received them. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je m'excuse, c'était un peu plus tard, malheureusement.
That's okay.
Il n'y a pas de problème.
So Bruce, in regards to the new voting system, it seems to be operating without glitches. That's impressive.
Good. Yeah. It's taking us about 12 to 13 minutes per vote.
I remember in 95 when I was an MP, we were 3 MPs that were tasked with looking into electronic votings. And one of the places that we went to was the Knesset in Israel. And they'd been electronically voting there for 20 years. That was in 95.
Yeah.
And so we reported move forward. But, the system just was bucking. And so I'm very happy that finally it's there and working.
Yeah, and much with the hybrid system for connecting, I do think the mobile app will continue in certain circumstances and conditions for the future as well, because it does afford some connectedness for MPs. I'm sure the House will stipulate what kind of scenario that will be permitted, but even though it's scheduled to sunset, I think when we recess in June, I do think post pandemic we'll see a utility of that voting app. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, we haven't tried it in the Senate, of course. The time frame. We only have currently like 90 senators that vote, so it's not as big as 338.
Not as much of a chore, to get through 338 members. Yeah, that's for sure.
Mr. Stanton, do you know, is it a system that was developed? Is it a made in Canada solution, or was it something that was adapted or adopted from another parliament?
That's a good question. Our team here, of course, worked on it, but I'm not sure the IT resources that they drew upon for the development of the app. There have been other legislatures that have been working on this as well. So that's a good question. I mean, it might be good for some of our clerks that were integrally involved in that, but we're. Even though it's been a year now, a little over a year since we got into all this, the literal sea change in technological capacity here for us has just been incredible, and great credit to the crew here that did it.
Yeah, it might be, Alicia, it might be something that ParlAmerica could look into when we have meetings and there's motion that needs to be voted on. I don't know. Anyway, I'm impressed. I'm impressed with the system.
Yeah.
We did a meeting earlier this week for parliamentary staff looking on the topic of disinformation, but looking at the use of technology in parliaments. And we actually did have the head of the IT from the Parliament of Canada, Soufiane, was there, moderated a session for us. And he certainly seemed very, he had a lot of relationships with the other clerks in the room, like from Brazil, who they have been doing they've had online apps for a while, in Chile. So I do have a sense that they do actually speak among themselves from the different jurisdictions, because he seemed very knowledgeable. He's like, "Oh, hello, how nice to see you." Good morning, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, this is Speaker Bridget Anissa George from Trinidad and Tobago, Vice President of ParlAmericas. You're muted, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. I'll never get this right. Good morning to you all.
Bonjour,
Good
madame.
morning.
Madam Speaker, I'm not sure if you know the Deputy Speaker from the Parliament of Canada, Bruce Stanton. He's here to give remarks.
Okay, good morning, Deputy
Nice to see
Speaker.
you this
Nice
morning.
to meet you.
And I believe you meant, I mean, I guess we call it in the Senate is pro tempore, right? So
Yes.
but
Yes.
essentially,
Yes.
same, Deputy
Yes.
Speaker.
Yeah,
But you meant,
we're still in an archaic mode.
I met you last week in the first session. Yes.
hello,
Good
Senator
morning.
Henfield.
Good morning, everybody. Always a pleasure.
Good morning.
Good morning from the
How are
Bahamas.
you?
Morning, Senator.
I'm good. Hi,
Bonjour,
everybody.
is Senator Cormier, bonjour.
Bonjour, good morning, everyone.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Nice to see you again.
Bonjour,
Bonjour.
monsieur.
So here we are. We know for Senator Rangat was reminding, we need to be starting punctually today. So we're letting people in now, colleagues, and we'll
Yeah.
fill up
Good.
the room.
Yeah, I see we're also joined by one of our experts for our high-level panel this morning. Hi, Lucina. How are you?
Hi, good morning. Very well, thank you.
Hi.
Good
Thanks for joining
morning.
us.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
And good morning, Mr. Erskine Smith. Lovely to see you this morning.
Great to see you as well.
I do want to apologize because I will have to leave the meeting just for a few minutes in about 15 minutes from now to get in the Senate, but I'll be back right afterward and I'll be here for the whole meeting. Sorry about
Wonderful.
that. Okay,
Thank
merci.
you, Senator. Perfect. Nathaniel, I'll take
Yes.
the opportunity to introduce you to the Vice President of ParlAmericas, Speaker Bridget Anissa George from Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know if you've
Very nice to meet you.
with her
Good
before.
morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Nathaniel, good morning.
Good morning.
Nathaniel Erskine Smith is a member of Parliament who will be speaking on the high-level panel today about his work with the International Grand Committee for Disinformation.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And I guess I must apologize also that after my introductory remark, I will have to leave to be in the Senate chamber. So, but I hope that we can meet again, at least virtually. It might be some time before we can meet physically, but anyway, it's nice to see your faces.
Madam Speaker, are you is your house in session today too? I think Fridays,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, yes. So, but I think I should be able to get through most of the meeting. You will certainly lose me by about 12:30, which I think if we run on time. Yeah.
We will do our
I'll let
very
you know.
best to keep us running on time. My WhatsApp's open if you need to send me a note.
Yeah, sure.
All right, just letting everyone in here.
Buenos días.
Buenos días, senadora.
Buenos días a
Buenos
todos.
días.
Andrade de Ecuador, asambleísta nacional del Ecuador. Un gusto.
Buenos días, asambleísta.
Gracias, Alicia, gracias.
Y diputada Floria Sagrados, es de Costa Rica, ¿sí?
Sí, de Costa Rica, Floria Segreda. Es un placer estar de nuevo con todos ustedes.
Un placer tener ustedes con nosotros.
Igualmente, a todos ustedes.
Good morning, Senator Vieira. Lovely to see you again.
Yo saludo desde México. Soy la senadora Beatriz Paredes. Un gusto estar con ustedes.
Hola,
Buenos
senadora.
días.
Buenos días.
Buen día.
Perfect. We'll just give it I see they're coming in right now. So just a couple more minutes here as we let them in, and we will start on time-ish. I will admit more on time than we do in person, in fact. So we are more punctual when it, as you will know, Senator Ranget, from your time in our meetings, that we're always a little bit, Latin time.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ganesh Mahipal from the Parliament of Guyana, and it's a pleasure being here with you guys.
Lovely to meet you, sir. Thank you for being here with us.
And I'm sitting here with my colleague, Jermin Figuera, who's also from the Parliament of Guyana.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah.
Welcome virtually to Ottawa. I feel we've been doing these meetings for the last 2 weeks, and so I think you've all joined us in the journey of moving into spring, because 2 weeks ago I told you how cold it was and all of the snow we had, and today I have almost no snow left. We're in spring here in Canada. A little wet though. It's a little wet in Ottawa. Anyway.
Nice to hear. Nice to hear that.
Hola, Senadora Ovelar. Colleagues, this is the president of ParlAmericas, Senator Blanca Ovelar from Paraguay, who has joined us.
Buenos días a todos.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Un saludo fraterno desde un caluroso otoño de Asunción.
So I think we'll start by informing everyone that during this meeting, we do have interpretation into the 4 languages. You will find interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. So as we get started here, so you're aware of that, I will have colleagues repeat this in all languages so everyone is well informed about the interpretation.
Sí, Alicia, lo voy a decir. I will say it like in a few minutes, so we will say in all the languages.
Buenos días a todas, a todos. Saludo desde México, la diputada Mónica Bautista. Un gusto estar con ustedes.
Buenos
días. Buenos días, senadora.
Buenos días. Buenos días.
Vamos a comenzar. Muy buenos días.
Let's start. Good morning. We wish you welcome to the 5th gathering of the Open Parliament Network of ParlAmericas, co-organized with the Canadian Parliament. Before we start, we'd like to inform you that this meeting will take place with interpretation in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. To select your preferred language, just click on the globe at the bottom right of your screen and select the language of your choice. We would also like to remind all panelists and participants to please speak slowly to facilitate the work of our interpreters. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to repeat the message in all the other official languages. Before we start, we'd like to inform you that this meeting will take place with interpretation in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. To select your preferred language, just click on the globe at the bottom right of your screen and select the language of your choice. We would like also to remind you, all panelists and participants, to please speak slowly to facilitate the work of our interpreters. Thank you very much. Antes de comenzar,
Spanish, French, and Portuguese. To select your preferred language, just click on the globe at the bottom right of your screen and select the language of your choice. We would also like to remind all panelists and participants to please speak slowly to facilitate the work of our interpreters. Thank you. Antes de começar, gostaria de informar que esta reunião contará com interpretação em inglês, espanhol, francês e português. Para selecionar
I would like to tell you that this is,
gostaríamos também
we would like to ask all panelists and participants to speak slowly in order to help the work of our interpreters. And thank you very much for the patience of everybody with all these messages. So welcome. As you all know, last week we held two work sessions, one in French and English and the other in Portuguese and Spanish, where different parliamentarians, officers, and members of civil society participated on work about the subject of disinformation. And the purpose of this gathering is to build on the issues we identified in order to promote mechanisms that will lead to a responsible and open dialogue among the members of the society. I would like to give the floor to Senator Ranguet.
Senator Ranguet, you are muted, I'm afraid. We can't hear you.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Now you
we
hear
can
me?
hear you. Yes.
Okay. So I'm sorry, dear friends. I'll start all over. Au nom du Sénat du Canada, je suis ravie de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à la 5e rencontre du réseau pour un Parlement ouvert de ParlAmericas. Le Parlement du Canada est fier d'accueillir la rencontre cette année. Pour commencer, j'aimerais prendre un moment pour vous souligner le travail accompli par l'équipe du secrétariat international de ParlAmericas et pour tous les membres et du personnel de soutien qui ont aidé à organiser cet important événement. Merci beaucoup à vous tous. Cette année, ParlAmericas célèbre un jalon important. Fondée à Ottawa en 2001, l'organisation célèbre cette année ses 20 ans d'existence, ce qui est remarquable. Au cours des 20 dernières années, ParlAmericas s'est imposé en tant qu'organisation.
Imposed itself as a parliament and has been recognized in the whole throughout the hemisphere for its reliable work and its preeminence as an inclusive forum for discussion among legislators. It continues to serve as a place where timely and important issues are examined and valuable experiences are exchanged.
They promote responsible public disclosure. During the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, when physical distancing must be observed and public health authorities are encouraging people to stay at home when possible, we see that more people than ever now rely on communication technology as we are today to connect them to work, to school, and to family members and to friends. Most would agree that the internet can be an invaluable source of information. But the topic of today's gathering reminds us about the need to use this technology responsibly and to analyze information found there through a critical lens. The internet allows users to author information that is accessible worldwide. It also gives them unprecedented and rapid access to facts and figures. At the same time, it enables users to quickly spread false and deliberately misleading information. As legislators, we have a duty to represent the diversity of viewpoints of the public that we represent. This task becomes more challenging when there is a lack of agreement about basic facts and figures. At times, we see that the dissemination of false information has reduced the ability to engage in reasoned, evidence-based debate. A key challenge for us as legislature is how to respond to the complex and growing problems associated with disinformation. Increasingly, we see legislatures deliberating such topic as how to curb the spread of false information online, the role that social media platforms should have in removing misleading content, and how best to monitor and prevent foreign interference in elections. Looking ahead, the use of social media to share information will only become more widespread. We have a role to play in monitoring and assessing legislative options and in promoting viable solutions and ways forward. Communications technology is an enormously powerful tool. Since the beginning of the pandemic, it has been heartening to observe how legislators around the world have leveraged technology to allow us to meet virtually as we meet the needs of those we present. Au sein du Parlement du Canada, les sénateurs et les députés
In Canada's parliament, senators and members of the House of Commons have adapted their normal procedures and practices to provide video conferencing as a safe option for participating virtually in the work of the chambers, in parliamentary committees, and in the vital work of parliamentary associations. Today's gathering serves us as excellent reminder about how many of the countries in our hemisphere share the same values, outlooks, and goals. It also underscores the real value of multilateral forums like ParlAmericas in the conduct of international relations. I hope that you will seize this opportunity to deepen friendships, forge partnerships, and explore future relations between our countries and our peoples. In closing, I wish you a fruitful discussion. My hope is that our conversations will set us on a path to stronger engagement and strengthened ties between the countries of our hemisphere. Thank you very much and good deliberation.
Thank you, Senator. A continuación, invitamos al vicepresidente de la
We will
Cámara.
now invite the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, Bruce Stanton. Please go ahead.
Good morning, bonjour. I'm delighted to add my voice to that of my honorable colleague, Senator Ringuette, in welcoming all of you to the 5th gathering of ParlAmericas Open Parliament Network. Avant de commencer, à l'instar de la sénatrice Ringuette, je tiens moi
Before
aussi
starting, I would like to thank the staff and the International Secretariat of ParlAmericas for having organized this wonderful virtual event.
To offer my congratulations to ParlAmericas as it celebrates 20 years since its 2001 founding as the Inter-Parliamentary Forum of the Americas. Delegates should be proud that ParlAmericas has a solid reputation around the globe as an international influential forum for this hemisphere's legislators. The countries of the Americas and the Caribbean continue to grow increasingly connected. Access to the internet is more widespread than at any other time in our history, and the devices used to take advantage of this access are ever more affordable. People today often turn to the online world first when they are looking for information, and as we have experienced throughout the pandemic, to connect with family and friends. La réunion aujourd'hui est d'ailleurs un parfait
The
exemple.
meeting today is a perfect example of the way in which technology would allow legislators to surmount the different distances and the problems caused and the challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it allows to continue with the vital work for our citizens. In effect, it is this time, these difficult times, that the public turns more and more into their legislators to obtain their support and solutions. Transparency and the obligation to be accountable are essential for the legislatures, and they are the lessons that we hear today as we are in a situations that is actually unprecedented.
Today's gathering is a great opportunity to visit with friends and allies from throughout the hemisphere, to discuss our experiences and to share best practices on the timely and salient topic of our meeting, countering disinformation to promote responsible public discourse, but also on other issues that are top of mind. On the topic of our meeting, we as legislators must answer the following question. What role do we have in ensuring that there are standards, integrity, and reliability in the conduct of the internet? The issue is complex. Effective legislative responses must consider a variety of factors such as privacy, cybersecurity, national security, electoral integrity, transparency, media and advertising standards, and media literacy. I'd like to briefly mention two recent initiatives launched here in Canada to counter disinformation and promote responsible discourse. En mai 2019, Ottawa a accueilli une réunion de
In May 2019, Ottawa received a meeting called the Grand International Committee, made up of legislators of the whole world. Legislators of 11 countries, including Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, and St. Lucia, were present.
You'll hear more from my colleague, Mr. Erskine Smith, on more of this in the next session. The International Grand Committee was convened to investigate the effects of social media platforms on democracy and privacy. The Ottawa Declaration, which was signed by all participating legislators, includes commitments to foster market competition, increase the accountability of social media platforms, protect privacy rights and personal data, and maintain and strengthen democracy. A second initiative involves a task force that was created to monitor cyber threats and disinformation in the lead up to Canada's October 2019 federal general election. Comprising 5 high-ranking public servants, the task force role was to detect disinformation attempts and foreign interference in Canada's election, and to notify the public and federal departments about any significant attempts. Sur ce, je vous remercie tous d'avoir participé à
I would
cette
like to thank all of you for having participated in this event, where we are all very stimulated. I would like to see you again and to see you in person very soon. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias. Agradecemos sus
Thank
palabras.
you. We thank you for your kind words, and we would like to extend our gratitude to the Canadian Parliament for being our hosts. And in order to officially open this meeting, I have the pleasure of introducing our President, Senator Blanca Velar. President, you have the floor. Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to share today this memorable gathering of the Open Parliament. Before starting, I would like to pay tribute to the memory of parliamentarians, parliamentary officers who have been victims of this pandemic. Unfortunately, the pandemic has also impacted on our parliaments. So I ask you to observe a minute of silence in their tribute.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Once again, I would like to extend a greeting to all of you. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you in the opening of the plenary session of the 5th gathering of the OPN of ParlAmericas. I would like to especially thank the Canadian Parliament, who has graciously co-hosted this gathering, and our host of this morning, who I have listened to, Senator Ranget and parliamentarian Bruce Stanton, Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons. I extend my warmest greetings to my fellow parliamentarians and parliamentary officers of the legislatures of the Latin America and the Caribbean, and the panelists who will share with us their knowledge in a high-level dialogue. Thank you for accepting our invitation and share your expertise with us. The world is trying to find answers to these subjects, and I believe that this panel is going to be very illuminating regarding an issue that is a threat and could mine the basis of our society. I would like to tell you about what we have done. We decided to devote this 5th gathering of the OPN ParlAmericas to analyze the phenomenon of disinformation and its different effects, taking into account the globalized and polyphacetic features of this problem, which require a coordinated and collaborative approach based on science. Under this premise, last week we held 2 work sessions, one in English and French and the other in Spanish and Portuguese, together with specialists on the subject who studied and discussed with us the different aspects of this important subject, which by promoting disinformation, and since information is the basis for our society and democratic governance, it represents an important problem, because that problem has an impact, a greater impact on certain sectors of society, such as ethnic minorities, women, etc. And we believe that this disinformation, the ethical algorithms and the protection of data, electoral integrity and collaboration with communication media are important subjects in this field, and which require an approach which commits us as Parliament, because we must collaborate decidedly to guarantee that democracy and information is as close as possible to actual fact. It is possible to state that one of the great findings of this work is the consensus around the seriousness of the effects of disinformation and computer propaganda about sovereignty and national security. It is obvious that the dissemination of digital disinformation and computer propaganda has had serious effects on democratic societies. Evidence, for example, in the dissemination of hate speeches, the growing proof of interference in elections, and the degradation of democratic dialogue. We believe that in our societies where there's more polarization, this democratic dialogue should be more geared towards a common interest. But however, we see a degradation of this democratic dialogue. It is also possible to point out that leveraging the power and ubiquity of the different technological tools, national players and foreign players have orchestrated campaigns of disinformation in order to undermine the democratic principles that we share by disseminating harmful narratives that exacerbate social and political polarization and promote anti-democratic positions among the citizens. These actions have included ongoing campaigns of disinformation regarding efforts in order to contain the effects of the pandemic, relentless viciousness in speeches against women, migrants, ethnic groups, and groups that have been historically marginated, and the arbitrary and hostile disparagement of political actors and democratic institutions. This complex scenario forces us to be bold and innovative, which deal with, on the one side, with the all-embracing power of many of the very large technological companies, and on the other side, from the conditions that have facilitated the consolidation of monopoly models and anti-competitive practices. Of course, it is necessary that legislators have a cautious approach, respectful of civil and political, economic, social, and cultural rights. And this is very difficult to deal with because we're always very close to what could be considered censure, and that is very far away from ideas, democratic ideas. We need the support of social groups and civil society, but the information sometimes is disseminated and goes against what we want to do to mitigate the effects of disinformation and computer propaganda or publicity, to answer to the consolidation of monopolic models in the field of ICTs, to promote the use of ethical algorithms, which are inclusive. Those algorithms are super in order to show us trends and inform business, but we want these algorithms that are used in the big networks should have an ethical component using important and good information. And this is essential because these initiatives are viable and are necessary in order to deal with serious and important information. The nature of these phenomena requires answers from our congresses. And this goes beyond our power. We have to think about this together. And that is the nature of our organization, which promotes the solidarity and the search for answers that are common to all of us. That is why the spirit behind our work in ParlAmericas is to provide you with a platform so that the legislators of the Americas and the Caribbean may gather in order to knowledgeably discuss about the most pressing issues that impact our hemisphere. I hope that this fifth meeting of the OPN of ParlAmericas will allow us to advance in our dialogues in order to respond to the state of affairs, and so share good practices in order to take them to our parliaments and share them with our colleagues. I'm sure that we will leave this meeting with a renewed commitment to the democratic principles of transparency, freedom, and inclusion, and we will continue to foster the strengthening of our institutions through the promotion of access to public information, accountability, civic engagement, and the high standards of parliamentary and ethics and parliamentary probity. To have politicians who are necessary for our new society. I would like to conclude to take advantage of the occasion to congratulate you all on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the ParlAmericas. We're going to celebrate our 20th anniversary, and this is the most representative of these organizations of this type in order to foster the different challenge us to face these challenges. So we congratulate ourselves for celebrating our 20th anniversary, and this organization gathers 35 legislatures of the North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean. And today the council has representatives of 19 parliaments of the whole hemisphere in order to celebrate accordingly the 20th anniversary. Thank you very much to the Parliament of Canada for the mainstay role that they have played in starting ParlAmericas, and they continue to work in this way by supporting the organization, hosting the International Secretariat, and also the Government of Canada for supporting our programmation. I'm very proud to address all of you as President of ParlAmericas, and before I was the President of OPN, and I'm very fond of this network because it promotes the values that will help to strengthen the democracy and will help us to deal with social inequalities, and that they require the need. And I'm very proud of having chaired this meeting and to make sure that you are going to learn a lot during this meeting. And we're going to, I hope we're going to have legislatures that are going to be committed.
Thank you very much, Senator Ovelar, for your kind words. And as we usually do in our meetings, we are going to now have a group picture. So please enable your camera so that and smile so that we can take a picture with all of you smiling.
Si me avisan, mis colegas, cuando.
If my colleagues could please let me know.
Muchas gracias a todos y todas.
All right, thank you all very much. And now we will continue with our high-level panel on the impacts of disinformation on democracy and international progress to address this phenomenon. Now, I would like to invite the Honorable Senator Renard Henfield from the Bahamas, who is also the Vice President of the ParlAmericas Open Parliamentary Network for the Caribbean. Senator, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Good morning, colleagues, subject matter experts, our host, Canada. It is always a pleasure to join all of you here at ParlAmericas, and welcome again this morning. Now, permit me please to recognize the President of ParlAmericas and the Vice President of ParlAmericas in the persons of the Honorable Senator Overlair and Speaker Anisette George, of whom we are all proud, especially me, and it is an honor to assist and serve. Now, today, I would also like to begin by explaining the methodology for this segment this morning. What we're going to do is we're going to have 3 subject matter experts, and I will pose questions to each of them so that we can have a conversation to dig deeper into the topics. Once we've gone through 2 rounds of those questions, we will then move on to an open floor discussion for everyone. So that's the methodology. We're going to have a conversation this morning with the subject matter experts, 2 rounds, and then we'll open the floor to everyone. As our ParlAmericas President, Senator Overlair, remarked earlier, the importance of working together to fight disinformation was highlighted in our previous inter-parliamentary dialogues, given its multifaceted and global nature. Therefore, it is essential to continue having these spaces that bring us together to take necessary actions in our countries and thus continue to promote peaceful and democratic societies. Today, we have a high-level panel with renowned specialists precisely to focus on the route that our countries should take to stop disinformation and prevent its negative impact on our democracies, while building on the basis of the dialogues that we held this week and last week, where we addressed the gender dimensions of disinformation, data protection, electoral integrity, the impact and role of the media, and ethics and algorithms. In this panel, we are joined by Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, Member of Parliament from Canada, who is representing the International Grand Commission on Disinformation. Also, Mrs. Catalina Botero, Member of the Facebook Oversight Board, and Ms. Lucina D'Amico, Gender Equality Expert and co-founder of She Persisted Global. One of the main points on which there seems to be consensus, colleagues, one of the main points, that we have consensus is that disinformation is a threat to our democracies, our societies, and our dialogue. And today we begin with the panel with Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, Member of Parliament, again, from Canada, who is representing the International Grand Commission on Disinformation. Before I go over to Mr. Erskine-Smith, let me just remind everybody that you are able to follow in the various languages of your preference. So should any of our panelists wish to speak in their native language, by all means, feel free. We just ask everybody to follow and listen. I'm going to come to my first question for Mr. Erskine-Smith as we come out of the gate. Mr. Smith, one of the main topics in this conversation refers to the business model under which large technology companies operate. This issue has been identified as critical by the International Grand Commission as well. What could you tell us about it, especially from a legal perspective? And if you can also share with us, what is the role of the International Grand Commission on Disinformation? The floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate being here. I suppose I would go backwards insofar as start with the role of the International Grand Committee. This was begun really in partnership as between the Canadian Parliament with the Parliament in the United Kingdom, where we had gone down this rabbit hole really in studying the Cambridge Analytica scandal as it related to Facebook. And then we really became a partner with a committee in the UK, working hand in hand in that kind of investigation, because there had been a Canadian company that had come before our committee a couple of times that had been involved in the Brexit campaign. And so out of that cooperation, we determined that this was a global problem that needed a global solution. And really under the leadership of Damien Collins, a conservative colleague of mine here in Canada, Bob Zimmer, who was the chair of our committee, where we'd undertaken significant privacy reform review and the Cambridge Analytica investigation. And we came together and then sent invitations out to other parliaments. And the first meeting took place in London, and the second meeting was hosted by us in Canada, in Ottawa, in late May of 2019. There have been subsequent meetings since. I missed the one in Ireland because we were in the midst of an election here. And the most recent meeting that we had was actually a virtual one, of course. And I suppose when we look at the business model, I think it's useful to turn to the 4 themes that the IGC reviewed and identified and highlighted in the last meeting that we held. And the business model really calls for a mass collection of data, and Taylor Owen, who attended before ParlAmericas, recently identified this as well. The mass collection of data obviously has privacy concerns, and that's the issue that has really drawn me to this larger conversation, is an interest in privacy issues. We increasingly live our lives online, and our laws need to reflect that reality, and that includes privacy reform. We've seen the EU move in a serious way towards greater privacy reform, but we haven't seen other countries catch up quite so quickly, and we do need to catch up. Competition law identified by a number of different countries, including the United States, appears to be looking to be more active on this front going forward. We've had we have I would say, a fairly nascent conversation in Canada about the need to reform our competition laws, and the fact that consumers we've long protected as it relates to price, but we have not taken a competition lens as it relates to big tech and as it relates to privacy and consumer interests that extend beyond price. Other countries are ahead of that, but I think, again, the international community has to catch up, including Canada. And then we look at the business model of using that information and the attention economy. And I suppose it's useful there to highlight a couple of different issues. One is the impact on our elections, and you rightly noted there's consensus there that disinformation, misinformation can undermine democracies, and that is of great concern. We have seen that already to date. And so how do we go about confronting that? We actually in Canada have, I think, and my colleague Bruce Stanton referenced some actions in Canada, but one action is a much stronger election law, an advertising registry during the election period to ensure that there is greater transparency and accountability for the ads, the content that is being promoted through advertising at a minimum. The second piece, though, and when you touch on ethical algorithms, that's probably the broad conversation, and a subset of that conversation is about the amplification of problematic content. And there's obviously a conversation that needs to happen here as between free speech and the laws to protect other areas of public interest. But free speech is, of course, an important, freedom of expression is an important right that we also want to maintain and protect. And so when we look at the balance in that regard, obviously in the Canadian context, we're looking at legislation that would address illegal content, taking down illegal content. Our colleagues in the UK have looked at a duty of care model, which extends beyond that and extends the responsibility of platforms beyond illegal content to other kinds of harmful content. From my perspective, and I think where there is greater consensus as it relates to the IGC, we have certainly looked at the problem of, it's one thing when you are a host, a platform is a host, and individuals are posting comments, and obviously the host in that case may well not be liable, ought not to be liable as a general rule, unless there's notice and they fail to take down that content potentially within a reasonable period of time. But the amplification of content, effectively promoting that content via the various algorithms that the companies employ, that level of not only algorithmic transparency, but algorithmic accountability is the other area that we are very much focused on in a serious way. And I think that the world has yet to catch up. So the EU has a Digital Services Act. I mentioned the UK's duty of care. We're starting to have conversations internationally on this, but there is not yet, I think, a broad consensus, and there's still much work to be done. And so that would be an area of focus going forward for the IGC in a really serious way.
All right, thank you so much. And interestingly enough, you alluded to free speech, freedom of expression. And our next guest on the panel is going to speak to us in reference to that very same topic. But allow me to just set the stage again. In addition to countering disinformation, which obviously affects our democracies, we have recently seen some self-regulatory attempts by the companies themselves. For example, the creation of the Facebook Oversight Board, or some decisions made by Twitter regarding specific users and topics. We've also heard of legislative initiatives designed to regulate social media and big tech companies, as was the case in Australia. So I'm going to now segue from what you would have just shared to our next guest, which is Mrs. Catalina Botero, a member of Facebook's Oversight Board. And Mrs. Botero, I would like to begin by posing the question to you in this first round. One of the most recurrent discussions in last week's working sessions was precisely on the inherent tensions between content moderation and the respect for freedom of expression. Given your work as Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression in the OAS, and currently as a member of the Facebook Oversight Board, how can this balance be maintained? And how does Facebook Content Advisory Council work? So how can this balance be maintained? And how does the Facebook Content Advisory Board or Advisory Council actually work? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will speak in Spanish. Quiero agradecer
I would like to thank ParlAmericas and Canada that is hosting this meeting, and everyone who made this conversation possible today. Disinformation in democracy is clearly one of the largest challenges we're having right now. And there are many phenomena that contribute to disinformation, and we need to, first of all, differentiate those phenomena. For example, the Cambridge Analytica issue was mentioned. One of the important serious phenomena that seriously contributed to disinformation in terms of electoral issues was the inappropriate and illegal use of personal data to generate disinformation strategies targeted to certain audiences so that electoral results were affected not only in the United States, but also in other countries as well. And then there's the phenomenon of electoral data. The second phenomenon is the concentration of the big platforms, which is different from personal data. It is related, but it is different. There is a huge concentration of the big platforms, and so the debate becomes poorer. It is more difficult to have a more plural, more enriched debate on issues that we're all concerned with. But this is a different phenomenon. And then there is a third phenomenon, which is digital citizenship. Not everything is the responsibility of platform and people who make an inadequate use of personal data. We as citizens do have a responsibility in amplifying those contents. And this is something we do need to discuss. What are we doing in primary and secondary education so that people who have access to the digital sphere can make use of that sphere in an adequate fashion? Then this is a third phenomenon. A fourth phenomenon is the amplification of certain content by means of algorithm. You mentioned this here, and I think we need to start talking about technology. Technology is not neutral, and algorithms play a huge role in the amplification of those contents. And then there's the fourth phenomenon, or a fifth phenomenon actually, and that is content moderation. Which contents should remain within this political conversation, within the digital spheres, which are the ones that should be excluded and with which criteria and who should do this. These are the important questions, the two big questions of content moderation. So there are different models here today. Some people like me believe giving the state the task of content moderation can be worse than the disease, especially in electoral contexts, because the temptation to remove the content that are deleterious for those who are in power from social media is huge. And I don't need to explain this. You know this much better than me. Many of you either are part of a government coalition or have been at the opposition or know that they can be in the opposition, and you know the risks that we see when the government has the possibility of moderate all the contents in social media, because I think this actually is disinformation. So what we have proposed is certain models for content moderation, including two issues. First, content moderation rules, criteria that are adjusted to human rights international law. This is probably the most important rule. When we moderate contents and we make the decisions which are the contents should remain, and these are the ones that should be removed, the fundamental parameter should be human rights international law, which is a kind of law that has been built by all the states, considering all the legal traditions and catering to the different assets in conflicts. This hasn't been imposed by anyone. It's not an imposition of a single government or governmental organizations or power groups. This is a law that has been built throughout the last 60 years in terms of freedom of speech, and it is perfectly applicable to content moderation in the digital world. And this is key. Second, who can do this? Those of us who defend freedom of speech, we say there must be two key players here. Independent players within the platforms themselves, who do not act in consonance with the interests of the platforms and the economic interests of the platforms or the political interests of the platforms, but they should be fully independent of those platforms, but they should not be state actors. They should be actors who can use the human rights international law to moderate those contents in an autonomous, impartial, and independent fashion. And this is something I'm going to refer to at the end of my talk. And if somebody has to do this in the state, then it has to be the judiciary. Those state agents who are autonomous, independent, and impartial, and they have to do this under the human rights international law. So this is my proposal. So what is the criteria? Human rights international law. Who should do this? First, the platforms themselves, by having independent councils or moderation tools that are independent. And finally, when the states will meddle in this, then it should be the judiciary. We should also talk about the model created or invented. This is the only model that exists today that is independent from the platforms. It's a very interesting model that it's in its inception, and it is a new model. It's in a way a bit exotic. And so we are just starting to experiment with it. And I want to talk about this in my last minutes of this intervention. What is the purpose of this model? It is creating a system that will make human rights international law to inform all the content moderation. So when a platform makes a decision of what to remove and what to leave, then this has to be informed by human rights international law. And the company has to be subjective to accountability, and it has to be fully transparent. This is the goal of the model. How can we achieve this? How can we achieve Facebook, which has 3 million users, to become a transparent company that is accountable and that makes decisions under human rights international law? And this is where the model characteristics come into play. We create a legal person that is completely independent from Facebook, that has an autonomous asset of $130 million provided by Facebook, but this is not revocable. Facebook has already given it, and it cannot ask for it back. And it is made up of a group of people. Facebook names or appoints 4 co-chairs. There's myself, and also the ex-prime ministers of Denmark, someone from Stanford, and a professor from the University of Columbia who works on free speech at that university. And then we make up a first group made up of 20 members, fully diverse members from many regions in the world. And together, these 20 people will include the other 20. But Facebook cannot make a decision to sever us. So there are some international guarantees, and we can say anything in respect of Facebook, and Facebook cannot tell us that we need to stop working there. We have a fixed work term. We will only leave if the council themselves considers that the code of ethics has been violated. This is a very similar code from what we see in the judiciary. It is then an organization that has guarantees for independence and impartiality, but it is also very diverse. If we can do this from the perspective of the global north, it will not work. And this is what the large companies have done in the past few years. So we need to be more diverse because the context is important, because a speech in Myanmar is completely different from speech or discourse in Colombia, in India, in Paraguay, or in Canada. The context is essential. And in order to understand context, we need it to be integrated in a very diverse fashion. There must be more liberal observers and people from all walks of life. We even need to include the religious sphere. We need to have people who belong to different ethnicities and races and religious communities, and especially marginalized groups. They are usually the ones who are most affected by certain types of content in social media. What is our competition? We have 2 kinds within our jurisdiction. We can make 2 types of decisions. We need to decide if a certain type of content was properly or improperly moderated. For example, Facebook makes the decision to suspend Donald Trump's account. This is the case we are having now. We need to decide if the decision to remove the contents that were removed on January 6th were adequate or not. And Facebook, in its bylaw, has agreed to meet this decision. And actually, experts believe that it was only the first time that Facebook has yielded part of its power to an external organization. And the other thing we can do is recommend Facebook that they change their policies. It's not important to see what the content, which content is moderated, but how it is moderated. Automated systems for content moderation, prohibiting, for example, nudity in their policies, and they prohibit that women be naked. The top part of a woman cannot be uncovered because of Facebook policy, except in warnings of, for example, in breast cancer campaigns. There are a few exceptions, but part of the indigenous communities in our countries, they are women, they are topless. they live topless. This has nothing to do with pornography, with sexual incitation. It has to do with a culture. And if Facebook prohibits those images, they are excluding the image and therefore the messages that are coming from those communities that are traditionally marginalized from public conversation. And this is then through automated conversations. And so I'm coming back to this. The decision on the specific content is important, but
I know, and I hate to jump in here because obviously you are in high flight and you are sharing so much valuable information. I'm just cognizant of our other panelists, and I know we're going to have about a half-hour segment to delve more into it and a second round. So just forgive me, and I'm going to ask you just to please make a note of where you were headed with that just now. It's valuable information. There's so much you've shared just now. I have 2 pages of notes already and questions that I will pose to you, but I need to get over to our third subject matter expert, which will be then Ms. Lucina D'Amico. And Ms. D'Amico, if you can just ready your microphone for me. Your first round of intervention is going to be thus. Another very relevant issue that we addressed last week was the gender dimensions of disinformation and its impact in the political participation of women. And it's a great segue from what was just raised by Ms. Botero. To clarify this important aspect of disinformation, I would like to ask you, what is meant by gender disinformation? How is it manifested and what are its effects? So Ms. Lucina D'Amico, if you can unmute your mic, the floor is yours. And I'm going to repeat that for you again. We want to better clarify this important aspect of disinformation. And I'm asking, what is meant by gender misinformation? And how is it manifested? And what are its effects? The floor is yours.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And if you could allow me to share my screen, there are a couple of images I'd like to really show that might be able to outline better what I'm talking about. That's
by all means,
wonderful.
go right ahead.
Thank you. Yes. So a couple of years ago, I went in to study the relationship between women in politics and social media. It was an interest of mine as a women's political participation expert, and something that I came across very quickly was the element of disinformation, how women were reporting more and more being concerned about starting a political career, or were self-censoring in some ways, or were very damaged, in their mental health. Their families were terrified and under terrible strain because of the abuse that they received online, as well as the more subtle threat of gendered disinformation. When we think about the overall element of abuse, an Economist Intelligence Unit study came out last week that reported that actually 90% of the women they interviewed in the Global South had experienced or witnessed online abuse, and misinformation and defamation were reported as the most common tactic used. So this is for women in general. For women in politics is actually much worse. What I did find, I wanted to get some clearer data on the type of disinformation and abuse that women in politics were receiving. So I actually started taking kind of like a very high profile case, the first few months of the US Democratic presidential primaries. So again, very high profile race where social media companies were trying to be as careful as possible, doing things right. I partnered with a data analytics artificial intelligence company, and we looked at the first 4 months after the launch of the campaigns of the various male and female candidates. What we found there was that across the political spectrum, female candidates were more targeted with negative content. So again, they received more negative tweets. The study referred mostly to Twitter. They received more negative tweets, and the tweets were coming from sources that were lower in credibility and higher in bias. Credibility really talks about whether someone is an authentic actor or inauthentic, so the likelihood of being a bot. And there we found way more bots for women than for male candidates. And the higher in bias, meaning those were actually accounts that were way more likely to retweet, in fact, fake information, you know, right-wing, extreme right-wing, partly untruthful information. So this is, you know, this is the quantity. On the quality side, we did find that the storylines were very, very sticky, regardless of the news cycle. For women, those storylines were in fact really focused on their personality, you know, whether Kamala Harris was authentically American or not. And so again, this story, she probably, because she's Black, frankly, she couldn't be American. Maybe where is her passport? Where is her birth certificate? The whole story that we had heard in the past again, there were an overwhelming amount of stories about the fact that she would have gone to power through sexual favors that she would have given to powerful men, as per the Tritus misogyny playbook. And yet this is a story that you will find over and over and over again in endless Facebook groups. And, you know, I challenge you any moment in time right now to go on Facebook, in fact, and just like, you know, check for Kamala Harris, you will find a deluge of images in the open groups, of stories, fake stories around these sexual favor narratives. And you can only imagine what's going on, you know, in actually the closed groups, where you will see over and over stories about Kamala Harris not even being a woman, but being a transgender, you know, for whatever reason, just as a matter of insult. Talking about Kamala Harris here, but, you know, overall for the women, we found again that those narratives were very sticky, always the same, regardless of any reality or new information, and that they really looked at their personality. It could be happening the same at certain times for men and male candidates. At some point, you know, stories came out regarding Joe Biden and potential sexual harassment. Then there was a focus on his personality. That stayed for a couple of weeks, that the news story was fresh, and then it went away. For women, it stays over and over and over, regardless of whatever happens or they do or say. You know, when we talk about disinformation and those bots, this is a little bit also what we are talking about. There was a really coordinated attacks at the same time. 3,000 posts went out from supposedly different sources, all of them posting as their own, as if this was a new information they were coming up with. And instead it was the same thing, reposted across various platforms and kind of like, you know, disseminated. And so when I talk about disinformation and gender disinformation in particular, I'm referring to the spread of deceptive or inaccurate information and the images. The images part is really key when it comes to women. Why is it key? 96% of all existing deep fakes circulating in the internet are featuring women in acts of non-consensual pornography. That is the relevance of, you know, the images, and the majority of those non-consensual pornographies of very well-known women, including women in politics. And so here you have to, you know, realize that the image part is really essential for women. And this is something where social media platforms are actually doing very bad in detection and stopping these things. We all remember, you know, Telegram and the over 680,000 cases of, you know, unconsensual nudes, fake nudes that came out last year. So gender disinformation is the spread of inaccurate, deceptive or inaccurate information and images against women political leaders, journalists, female public figures, following storyline that often draw misogyny as well as gender stereotypes around women. Generally, they go around them being too sexual or something around their sexuality, unintelligent, untrustworthy. Those are stereotypes, those are biases that exist in society, and political actors, more often than not, are in fact using them to launch those disinformation campaigns. This type of disinformation is designed to alter public understanding of female politicians' track records for immediate political gain, as well as to discourage women from seeking political careers. Over and over, we have seen, in fact, if we look at the sources of these disinformation campaigns, sure, it can be the individual misogynist. More often than not, there is an entire political party structure. Depending on the countries, you might find the office of the prime minister himself or the president being linked to those disinformation campaigns. And what am I talking about? Again, there is the abuse, and here's like a very famous case of former Speaker of the House in Italy, where endless threats she received, and including images with her head cut off, pretty much very clearly saying, this is what we will be doing to you. And by the way, when she posted the names of the people that harassed her, Facebook called her, threatened to sue her because she was violating the terms and conditions of Facebook by sharing, private information shared, the names of those people. She is, in fact, she was the Speaker of the House, so she wasn't scared. But I have heard over and over from women say, if you're a woman at a lower level in a different country, you might actually be terrified of having Facebook lawyers, behind you. So this is something that's very real. There is the abuse. On the line, on the other line, you see the disinformation. There came out a fake story about her using some of the funds from the European Union of the Recovery Fund to be given to immigrants. It was a fake story. Supposedly it does feel, not particularly gendered. In reality, it was playing on a previous fake story that, in fact, she would have, hosted immigrant men in her home. She's a divorced woman, and so in order to use them for sexual favors, because she has sexual preferences for immigrant men, a pretty horrible and tritest whatever set of story with so many horrible stereotypes within it. And so basically using this story as the fact that they would have in fact, she would have in fact given preferences to those immigrants, played also on a sexualized previous misinformation story that was going viral. So those are the two types of things we see happening: abuse and disinformation playing on each other.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. D'Amico. I have, again, several questions I'm going to put to you once we get to the question and answer period. But that would conclude round one for us. We're now going to move into round two. And Ms. Botero, I'm going to come back to you to begin round two. And everyone who has spoken so far, I admire the passion, the knowledge. Clearly, we are sitting at the feet of the subject matter experts. I'm going to learn a lot from you today. In your contributions and in the question and answer period. But Ms. Catalina Botero, if you can just unmute your mic, the second round of interventions begins with you. And I'd like to put to you, the Facebook Oversight Board is one of the first attempts to moderate content on social networks and aims to precisely address these attacks that were mentioned by Lucina, as well as contribute to a climate of peace and truthfulness in our interactions on social media. Along with these, along these lines, what are the main obstacles, be they legal, ethical, or logistical, when moderating content on social media platforms like Facebook? And in what way can parliamentarians contribute to alleviate these obstacles? So again, along these lines, what are the main obstacles, be they legal, ethical, or logistical, when moderating content on social media platforms like Facebook? And in what way can parliamentarians contribute to alleviate these obstacles And for everyone, just so that we can get through round 2, I'm going to ask everybody to please restrict their comments to 5 minutes, and then we can expand further in the question and answer segment, just to allow everybody to be able to answer their question in the second round. Then we'll come back to them. So Mrs. Botero, if you can unmute, the floor is yours. If you need me to repeat the question, please let me know.
Muchas gracias. Y le pido disculpas por haber sobrepasado el tiempo la vez pasada. Espero que no pase.
Thank you, and I apologize for using too much time. I hope I won't do that this time. So what are the obstacles? One is understanding the context, because context, I say this once again, do matter. It's not the same to say a phrase in a neighborhood in Canada than to say the same phrase in a country where a genocide is happening. And so context is probably one of the most important issues we need to understand. Another difficulty is local legislation, and this is where parliaments have a lot to contribute. That inter-parliamentary conversations about which could be the best laws in terms of freedom of speech to moderate content are essential. Local legislations sometimes create distortions in content moderation processes when those legislations are not in agreement with human rights international law. So I would say, in this context, in such an important meeting, I would like to mention then these things. So how can you help? There are two processes. One is regional in the Americans, and the other one is global. The High Commissioner for Human Rights in the United Nations is starting a global process, and it is very important to participate in that process. The best way for parliaments to help content moderation is understanding that this is a global issue and not just a national issue. And that's why we need to discuss this, and we need to engage the different stakeholders, not just the platforms, but also users, the communities that are affected, the opposition. We then need to have an intersectoral dialogue, and finally, dialogue within the Human Rights Commission. There was a dialogue yesterday where we also saw state actors to talk about content moderation. A good way for us to face this issue is incorporate the regional dialogues of the Americas to be able to find the best regional and global solution, because national solutions can simply break the internet architecture and they can end the internet as we know it today. That's why it is so important to mention that these global and regional dialogues do exist. And this is the end of my presentation within my time. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And by all means, I love your passion and your knowledge. We're going to go on then to the second intervention for Ms. D'Amico. In your work, you've explained that although sexism is essential to understanding gender-based violence on social media, there is a perhaps less visible dimension where anti-democratic actors make use of gender disinformation to undermine and exclude women from the public and political space. So the question to you then, what actions could we take from Parliament to stop violence and attacks on social media? What actions could we take from Parliament to stop violence and attacks on social media? That's one. And secondly, what aspects are crucial to consider when drafting legislation that addresses this issue? So I'll repeat that again. The question for Ms. D'Amico, what actions could we take from Parliament to stop violence and attacks on social media? And what aspects are crucial to consider when drafting legislation that addresses this issue? The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think it's really important to look at this, to look at this issue also beyond content moderation and beyond just being responsive. If we think of the way states are treating a number of industries from pharmaceutical to agri-food. We do not allow them to put products on our plates and in our bodies that are harmful, and then find it out, and then you say, whoops, sorry, just gonna give it another try, and then that doesn't work again, and then like, oh well, I guess we still need to fix it, and then we're gonna give it another try. This will just not work. I do appreciate, I really do appreciate the attention of my colleague Catalina on particularly the need of looking at content moderation from a diversity perspective, the need to have a number of different voices, but the content moderation alone will not be the solution. This is pretty clear. We really must look at the business model that right now is incentivizing and rewarding financially outrageous, fake, and hateful content. The attacks that we have seen that are coordinated have been successful because the social media companies have allowed for this content to actually receive many likes, be seen by many people, therefore generate a lot of money to those social media companies at the expense of social cohesion, at the expense of women's rights. So I think when we look at regulations, I really like this idea of, enhancing transparency, first of all, enhancing accountability, and looking at the model of the duty of care that we have seen some countries moving forward with, because it's just unacceptable that we have been treating this type of industry in such a special way and allowed them to move fast and break things as per Facebook CEO's infamous motto, when anyone else wouldn't be allowed. And just one last thing I want to say on the freedom of expression. Where is the women's freedom of expression that, are terrified of posting anything online? And again, Economist Intelligence Unit last week, women all over the world reported thinking twice before writing anything online because of the concern that, of the type of hate and harassment that they would receive. Where is their freedom of expression? I do not think that the current model that we have is in fact protecting vulnerable populations' freedom of expression. I think it's silencing them further.
Mr. Miko, again, humbled, and it is a pleasure to listen to you. And before I move on to Mr. Erskine-Smith, may I just ask you, is there any particular parliament who has passed legislation that you see making headways?
I am very hopeful about the conversation on the Digital Services Act in Europe. I think that, that is an important one. I think it's interesting also to look at what Australia is doing, and, the idea that social media companies might have to pay for the harm that they are doing. So I think that there are models there. I think that the UK is working on interesting contents and definitions, particularly again regarding the duty of care. I know the G7 is looking into that. I am very hopeful that in fact the tide is turning for social media companies, and we will see more and more countries holding them accountable.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to move on now to MP Erskine-Smith. This is your second round question, and to set the stage. To respond to a globalized phenomenon such as disinformation, it seems necessary to develop or work through instruments and institutions that favor global and regional work in a coordinated and concerted manner. From the International Grand Commission, what are the steps to shape an inter-parliamentary agenda that prioritizes the fight against disinformation in the region and the world? What could hemispheric spaces like ParlAmericas do to lead these conversations in the Americas and the Caribbean? The floor is yours, MP Erskine-Smith. If you need me to repeat the question, just let me know. I know I was long-winded there.
No, that's okay. I would pull it apart in a few different ways, and I would start with the importance, as I said before, of global solutions to global problems. And so it's great that in fits and starts, different countries are coming to the table with different solutions, and we'll learn from different countries and some of the missteps we make and some of the successes that we see. And we can start to see where the international course should be set. But I do think the International Grand Committee is an example of where, when you have annual regular meetings on a subject, you do bring greater accountability to these platforms, you do enhance the conversation, and you create a space for solutions. And so that work, I think, does need to continue. We need to build upon that, and I'll get to what it means for various regions and different, the ParlAmericas specifically. You know, we also, though, need to formalize mechanisms for our governments. So we should continue to meet as parliamentarians. That is important, and we need to push our governments to action. But there's been a call, even from now the private sector, for a digital stability board akin to a financial stability board. That you have, I think we need to see greater leadership, government to government, on these issues. And we have to recognize there will not be agreement, that context does matter, and different countries have different cultures. So we will set different limits to freedom of speech as far as it goes. Or at least at the margin. And so even as between Canada and the United States, we have different concepts of freedom of speech. But I think we ought to start from the premise, to the earlier speaker's point, that people don't always feel so very comfortable sharing information online because, frankly, we have not created a space online in all cases where existing laws are being adequately enforced. That hate speech, or in some cases, criminal harassment, is deplatforming individuals. And so I think at a minimum, we should expect an enforcement of our existing laws and ensure that we are taking not just an online harms approach, but an online safety approach. And we do have to be, I do think, cautious beyond, as I say, illegal content. We have to be cautious about free speech beyond that. But look, we have broadcasting standards here in Canada. And when you get to a place where algorithms are promoting content, I'm very glad to see the work of the Facebook Oversight Board. But self-regulation is not enough. I'm glad Facebook took the measure to establish such a board. Catalina sounds like a very valuable member of that board. But we can't, are we going to expect every company to act independently, to hold themselves to account in that way? I think we are, as policymakers, as parliamentarians, as elected officials, we are completely missing our obligations if we think that's acceptable. And I suppose the last thing I'll say, there are, well, two more things. One is content is actually one of the harder places to find perfectly common ground across countries. There are other areas, though, that we're seeing greater consensus built. Privacy is an obvious example, and we can work towards having an international governance framework to limit the mass data collection that we see, contrary to individuals' privacy. I think we're starting to see competition authorities work together across continents, really, to address the real concentration of power in a very small number of companies in our digital world. And I suppose when we look at that kind of cooperation going forward, parliamentary cooperation is increasingly critical for raising these issues. And we do need to make sure that it is less ad hoc. And I think we need to make sure that as we build it out, it's going to be challenging when we look at the International Grand Committee. If we start to add 30, 40, 50 countries to it, will it become too unwieldy? Will it become people giving speeches, and it will lose the accountability function that it served with a smaller number of individuals around the committee table? And so how do we continue to ensure that it is nimble and that it continues to be a force for really positive change? Well, I think we can start to look at regional conversations. So regional actors coming together under the auspices of, as almost subcommittees of the International Grand Committee, work on regional solutions where there may well be, in some content cases, greater consensus, and then to have a handful of representatives from various regions attend before the International Committee that would meet continually on an annual basis, I would hope, and we can then bring those different regional perspectives. I think that we're having this conversation as members of the International Grant Committee as well. And by the way, anyone who is interested in participating in future meetings, anyone who is interested in participating in the International Grant Committee going forward, please do reach out to me personally. I'm happy to coordinate that and happy to ensure your involvement. But I do think we have to take a regional approach and then bring those regional voices to that International Committee so that we do continue to have a relatively small number of committee members who are then speaking on behalf of their regions and then pushing the agenda forward to an even greater degree as a matter of accountability.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna just again give the methodology moving forward. So we went through 2 rounds, everybody. Thank you so much to the panel. And we certainly have had a high level discussion this morning. We are now moving on to the noon hour. So I'm gonna open the floor now for questions from the audience. I'm gonna ask you to use the raise hand option here on Zoom so that we can come to you in the order that you raise your hands and have you pose your questions or comments very briefly, succinctly, so that we allow as many persons as possible. And I would like for us to get to the point where I'm able to turn the floor back over to our panelists and allow them some closing remarks and a summary of their positions. What we've obviously heard today is that there are various views, but we all agree to counter disinformation while protecting freedom of speech. And again, it's finding that balance, that balancing, how do we balance that rights? Because that everybody has a right and we're trying to balance the rights. So please, some of the challenge put out so far is education on the use of the computers and the internet and the platforms, which is something we need to review as parliamentarians. So many of us have computer misuse laws in our jurisdictions. We may need to revisit them. And I love that challenge just now of regular parliamentary meetings and spaces to progress these changes and address the issues. So the floor is open to all of you. If you can please use the raise hand option so that we can then come to pose your questions to any of our 3 subject matter experts. There we go. We have 2 questions, and I'm going to go first to Floria Sagreda. If you can go ahead and unmute your mic and pose your question, please.
Sí, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Catalina Botero. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate her for always being open for Facebook to have your recommendations. But here's my question. Does Facebook receive their recommendations of this committee? And to what extent does this happen? Do you recommend, because this is a recommendation. So actually, what percentage of your recommendations is actually received by Facebook?
May I answer, Mr. Chairman? Good. Okay. De todos los casos que nosotros hemos conocido hasta ahora.
From all the cases we have known so far, and we are a completely new council,
Algo pasó. Bueno, no escucho, pero.
Something happened. I can't really hear.
Sí, no se escucha nada.
We hear nothing, actually.
Okay, I'm not hearing on this end either. So we're going to come back to Mrs. Botero. I'm going to move on then to Blanca Osuna. If you can hear me, please unmute your mic and pose your question.
Buenos días, gracias.
Good morning.
Good day.
And thank you. Thank you for this conference and congratulations. It's an excellent meeting. I'm going to say 2 things very briefly. First, a comment and then a question. With respect to the comment then, In the south of Latin America, there are 2 or 3 issues we have been working on in terms of links with different countries in the region. Violence in the media and violence in social networks is one of them. In my country, with the communications law, audiovisual communications law, we have added an observatory to monitor the different manifestations and expressions of disinformation and violence in the media. At the same time, and considering one of the interventions, I think it was Natalia. No, I'm sorry, it's actually Catalina Botero. She was saying there are different instances for intervention or moderation of the different contents. Well, in our region, the issue of justice and lawfare is actually a serious event that has institutionally affected the authorities and those who are in the government in power at present. So I would like to express my concern and my doubts, because this has happened in Bolivia, in Brazil, in my own country, Argentina, that I represent. At the same time, I want to inform you that the current Vice President of the nation, Christina Kirchner, who was also president for 2 periods, has sued Google for fake and violent information, and it was the justice, the one that has issued a decision against Google. So this is information. But now my question that is addressed to actually any of the panelists. How do you see, I mean, do you think in the short term it would be possible to reach an agreement that will contribute to a moderation of content by putting certain limits to these kinds of actions that somehow are violent and are anti-democratic? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Blanca Osuna. I just want to do a quick check to see if our expert is able to hear us, which would be then Mrs. Botero. Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you're coming through a bit muffled on my end. Ms. Botero, if you can hear me, you're coming through muffled. If someone could assist me and just confirm if you're hearing Ms. Botero.
No, Senator Henfield, she seems to be having bandwidth trouble, so we will be in contact with her through telephone to talk to her.
Thank you.
Okay,
thank
please
you.
proceed. I recommend we move on. We'll mute her and we move on to the next questions, and we'll try to get her back reconnected.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to Sol Marino. You were third. If you can go ahead, Sol Marino, and unmute your microphone if you're hearing me. Sol Marino, you had a question?
Hola, muy buen día. Soy Sol Merino.
I am Sol Merino, and more than a question, first, I would like to say that I like this parliament. It is the first time I participate, and I consider it something very important. And I have a question for whoever wants to answer it.
¿Cómo realmente
How can you actually regulate or make a proposal in order to regulate without impacting on freedom of speech? That would be my question.
And that is a great question. Any of our panelists?
Yes.
All right, that was a great question. There any of the panelists who would like to chime in?
I can chime in there.
Go right ahead, go ahead.
So I would say two things. One is, obviously, we all in our own respective countries have laws that restrict speech, right? So whether it is hate speech laws, whether it is criminal harassment laws, whether they are laws around defamation, we have laws, it's false advertising. We have laws already as it relates to restricting free speech. And so these rights typically are not without limit, and we have already made decisions to limit them. So on the one hand, I would say, and certainly the Canadian government here is focused very much on how do we ensure that our laws are enforced as it relates to illegal content, child exploitation, non-consensual images online. How do we ensure that we are forcing platforms to take down content that is illegal to begin with? Now you get to the second category, which is more fraught, where you are facing issues around content, misinformation, disinformation, but not harmful content, not illegal content. And so there, I think, from, people land in different places. The UK has a duty of care model that could potentially attach liability. We in Canada are not looking at that. I don't think fairly, although we did have a commission report that effectively recommended that via a duty on platforms to act responsibly, which is not so far away from a duty of care. But I would say the EU actually has a pretty strong approach to striking this balance through the Digital Services Act, which requires greater transparency and accountability as it relates to algorithms. Again, the promotion of content. And again, in our countries, we oftentimes will have Broadcasting Standards Act as just an analogy of sorts, but the EU Digital Services Act will ensure that the algorithms are being deployed in a way that is not focused specifically on taking down individual pieces of content as it relates to individuals' freedom of speech, but is focused on large platforms and large platforms only, and the problematic consequences, the harmful consequences to our society of how they amplify certain content. And then the second piece is the EU Digital Services Act has proposed a co-regulatory framework of effectively, you can think of broadcasting standards councils, other academics have talked about social media standards councils, but really sitting down, not just to have a Facebook oversight board, but really to sitting down with all of the large scale platforms to sit down and say, how do we hammer out as governments, as large platforms, hammer out effectively ethics and a code of conduct that can then be enforced by a regulator, but is a matter of co-regulation, and really in some cases simply asking the platforms to enforce the standards that they have already set for themselves as a matter of community standards.
Yeah, and to that, I would like to add that definitely transparency is a first step. Right now, we have no idea how many content moderators there might be on, different countries looking at different types of content, how much content gets flagged, of this content which is flagged, how much gets taken down. Every now and then, at some hearing, Facebook CEO comes up with some numbers, but we have no idea of the bigger pictures. There have been countries where, there was no native speaker actually looking at moderating content. And particularly in the global south and in smaller countries, this is a pretty enormous concern. So the transparency is the first. And then again, I think as my colleague Nathaniel said, it's really important to hold those platforms accountable also to their own standards. So Facebook is saying people below a certain age group cannot sign up. If you go, you will see that there is enormous amounts of people beyond, lower than that age group signing up. You will see a lot of the content happening in the closed groups, for example, that openly violates the terms of service, and nobody gets to check because nobody's flagging it. And there is where the content moderation has a problem. Why? Because the people in this group, say the people in the misogynist group, all agree on horrible pictures that they share to one another. None of them is going to flag them. And so those pictures are not going to be brought up anywhere. Nobody's going to take them down. More Facebook groups are going to be created, sharing such pictures with one another and happily doing so, as it happened for the Telegram, group sharing hundreds of thousands of pictures of fake nudes created, and all those users were pretty happy to exchange such pictures to one another. Nobody's taking them out, nobody's flagging them. So that's where the content moderation also, you know, has its own limitations. We need to have further transparency on everything that the social media platforms are doing. It's not particularly unusual. We require this for drug companies. We require this for food companies. We want to see what's inside certain things. We need to see what's inside, you know, those algorithms here too.
If I could just briefly pick up on that latter comment about seeing, we don't have to, as policymakers, we won't frankly understand exactly how these algorithms are working, but there are executives in the companies. I've spoken to constituents who work at Google that don't obviously understand everything that the algorithm is doing, and yet they work on that particular piece. And so I would say, when we look at a Canadian example, algorithmic impact assessments, right? So people can think of privacy impact assessments. People can think of, there's a call for child impact upon children assessment there. But when we look at algorithmic impact assessments, the Treasury Board here in Canada, if a public agency wants to implement an algorithm, they have to answer a series of questions, assess the risks of deploying that algorithm in that particular context, and in answer to that series of questions, depending upon those answers, they are placed in different risk categories. And depending upon the risk categories, there are different remedial measures. Just one example, one remedial measure might be, if there's an increased risk, would be that researchers are able to access the work that is ongoing so that they can publish, as a matter of accountability, what is happening and what maybe shouldn't happen going forward. And so we as policymakers, I think at a minimum, that expectation of transparency, we can talk about remedial measures, but at a minimum, transparency to the AIA, the algorithmic impact assessment process. And just as an IGC note, International Grand Committee note, when we had Facebook, Twitter, and Google before us at the IGC in Ottawa, I put it to all three of them. Have you undertaken algorithmic impact assessments? They each said yes. And I said, well, will you disclose them? And they all shook their heads. So I think this level of transparency on how the algorithms, the outcomes of the algorithms and the problematic outcomes is incredibly important.
Thank you both. Great job in responding to the question. Mrs. Catalina Botero, are you back with us? Mrs. Botero, can you hear us? Okay, if not, folks, we have three more. I'm hearing something. Ms. Botero, can you hear us? Okay, so we have three other persons that would like to pose questions, and these will be our final. Okay, we're still having issue with your internet. If you can hear me, we can't make out what you're saying. So perhaps if you can turn off your internet and come back on, or log out and come back in, that might help. In the interim, while we wait for you, I'm going to go over to Anthony Vieira. Anthony, you had a question. If you can go ahead and pose that question for us, please.
Sí, yo los escucho.
Hey, hi. Thank you. I haven't heard anything about net neutrality provisions, and I'd like that maybe to discuss. But my real question has to do with industry regulation. The traditional approach to regulation has been licensing and concession for telecoms providers and broadcasters, usually relating to restricting and regulating market entry and things like universal service. But the legacy regulation is not effective in the digital space. So one of my questions is, would you say that a different type of regulation is needed? Not necessarily more regulation, but better regulation. And having particular regard to the position of small states and microstates like we have in the Caribbean, which are particularly challenged by not having the human capital and the skill sets and the support services to regulate, as you might have in Europe and in Canada. So the question I'm posing is, are there any specific regulatory issues to support the national regulatory authorities in our microstates in this transition to the digital environment?
Very good question. And Mr. MP Smith, are you able to assist us?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a great answer, other than just in part to say Canada isn't immune to these challenges either, right? So I mentioned the Elections Act that we put forward, and it's a really strong act, and Facebook cooperated, and it worked quite well in our last election to tamp down on problematic election disinformation. But Google did not participate, and so during the election cycle, as someone seeking, re-election, I was unable to advertise on YouTube. Now, that presents challenges as a local candidate in its own way, trying to reach constituents. But Google just determined the Canadian marketplace is not big enough, and we're not going to participate in the solution you've prescribed because it's too cumbersome for us. And I guarantee if the United States implemented the same solution, they would come to the table. I guarantee that if the European Union prescribed the same solution, they would come to the table. So Canada faces, we have capacity to deliver on the legislation, but we don't have the clout necessarily to bring some of these large platforms to the table in quite the same way, which gets back to that point of the necessity for cooperation. We saw with Australia recently trying to force the issue of fairness as between news publishers and the platforms, and the first response from Facebook was to walk away from the table entirely, right? So even medium-sized, fairly large economies all considered, but smaller populations, we face some of these same challenges. So I would just emphasize the need for cooperation, and I would also emphasize, again, if there is capacity where certainly our civil service has been thinking through these issues, certainly as it relates to privacy legislation that we've just proposed, that is currently being debated today, actually in our Parliament at second reading, as it relates to online safety. I am connected with colleagues in the UK on this front, and we are undertaking similar efforts as it relates to taking down illegal content here in Canada. Where you feel like your various countries may lack that capacity, I would be perfectly happy. I know our civil service would be very happy to engage and to help that capacity building effort. So do engage with me, but I think we all face similar challenges and we need to work together.
Thank you so much, MP Erskine-Smith. The next question comes from Antares Vasquez, and then the final will come from Wilma Andrade. Forgive me, I'm pronouncing it wrong. So Antares Vasquez, please go ahead, unmute your mic, and if you can pose your question, followed by Wilma.
Senadora Vasquez?
Senator Vasquez? I'm sorry, I apologize. Thank you. It is a very difficult subject and requires regulation, but as regards the freedom of speech, this poses as challenges for legislation, but bots don't face this problem, and it is something that is used on social networks in order to amplify fake news and things that are prejudicial and damaging. I don't know whether there are some other parliamentarians who have already regulated on the use of bots in order to amplify content, and what is the opinion of the experts about this?
Great intervention. Before we go to Wilma, is there anyone that would like to respond?
I would just say, I could say briefly on that, we do have legislation that addresses the malicious use of computer systems where bots are used in a malicious way. It would attach. It wouldn't just be to amplify any content. It would be more specific and intentional in a malicious way. The second piece, just is what we've heard from experts. A number of experts have come before both our domestic Canadian committee, but also before in conversation with the IGC, and they have spoken about the need for what they have described as Blade Runner laws, where at a minimum bots are then they either are not part of the algorithm that would amplify content, but at a minimum, they are clearly, just as there's a blue check mark for those who are acknowledged to be real individuals and involved in some serious way in politics or business or what have you, that there be some way of identifying bots online.
Thank you so much. And Wilma Andrade from Ecuador. You'll be our last intervention, so if you can go ahead and unmute and pose your question for us, please.
Muchísimas gracias. Buenos días. Yo quiero que me
Thank you very much. I thank the panelists, and I am re-elected member of parliament in Ecuador, and I'm part of the parliamentarian group of Open Parliament in Ecuador. I take advantage of the possibility of participating in a plenary session, and this is very good because we are very close to celebrating our 20th anniversary of the ParlAmericas. And I also thank the Parliament of Canada for hosting this organization. Undoubtedly, Ecuador has incipient legislation about the principles of transparency, citizen participation, and value generation through education. But we're working on these subjects, and we have been able to show, especially as regards attacks through the violence generated in social network, especially against women, and this subject was dealt with here, we can have data about the last electoral process with more than 7,800 tweets that had discriminatory content, many of them with sentences or drafting that was very harmful against women and giving way to trends in many of them. So general discrimination against women has been shown in the election processes and in the political participation of women. So my question is this. Even though we may have politics of open government and open parliaments, the serious problem that Ecuador faces and other countries is the issue of control. And I would like the experts to point out how we can meet a balance point where we respect as a constitutional regulation the issue of the rights to communication as part of human rights, but also how can we achieve an efficient control? How can we come up with this overview that is the Achilles heel in the implementation or enforcement of the legislation? And thank you very much for allowing me to participate. And I want to greet you on behalf of my Parliament of Ecuador.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And is there anyone that would like to respond from the panel?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that it's really important that the states do not, take over the burden of and the cost, frankly, of trying to follow up with all kinds of abuses that are happening online just in a reactive way. We have seen a number of states advancing, in fact, very important and excellent legislation around online abuse and online violence against women, for example, with online violence being considered as something, that's important. I think that this is very, very valuable in many ways when it comes to political violence and kind of disinformation and really these coordinated attacks. There is just so far that type of legislation is gonna bring you, because every day the actors are changing. Every day the strategies are changing. They are becoming more sophisticated. They are becoming more complex. And so states really need to work in a collaborative manner, in a transnational manner, on the back end, to make sure that it becomes harder and more costly for companies to actually allow the harm to happen than reacting afterwards. Because again, there is just so many more police officers you can hire to follow up with the millions and millions and millions of negative and abusive and discriminatory content that is going on. That part is important, similar as the part of, for example, that was mentioned of civic education and media education. That part is important, but we cannot put all the burden on the citizens. We cannot put all the burden on the justice system without also requiring, in fact, that the companies share more of that burden on their side.
Thank you so much. And again, it's always a pleasure to listen to all of you on the panel. I'm so sorry that we have had issues with hearing Ms. Botero. But before we conclude this segment of questions, our immediate past president, Elizabeth Cabezas, would like to say a few words or pose a question. The floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Let me say hello to those of you who are part of this very important panel. I would like to congratulate ParlAmericas for this initiative, because we are addressing such an important issue as this management of information and the integrity of information that needs to be handled and managed with responsibility in social media. I would like to join Vilma Andrade, the assembly member, who has said in Ecuador, they are experiencing many other cases, as happens in many other countries in the continent. We're seeing a very strong violence against women who have been seen, especially now during the electoral campaign. There is an increasing aggression, an increasing violence, not only from the political field, but also from the violence against their families. This shows a lack of respect and how the boundaries between communication and, I would say, freedom of speech have crossed the line, and they have even invaded personal and private fields. They go against participation and especially political participation of women. I wanted to simply reflect together with you on the need that these actions against the large companies that manage social media, all of these need to be joint actions, I would say, so that they can have sufficient weight and strength. We have just heard an Argentine legislation who told us about a legal action against one of these large corporations, large networks. And I'm sure that if we do this together, bringing together all of these concerns we have, it will probably yield much better results than if we just do all of this in isolation. So I would like to ask a question to any of the panelists. What legal actions have yielded positive results, and have you recorded in your notes as a background, as an antecedent for this rejection and indiscriminate use of fake news? These are news that we know they're fake, but they still are online, and the companies are not willing to take them down because probably they have good traffic as a result of these news in their communication channels. Thank you.
Always a pleasure to hear from you, and greetings from the Bahamas. Is there any of our panelists who would like to chime in response?
I will just briefly say that I can't point in Canada to a legislative measure per se that has been undertaken on this front yet, that we have privacy legislation, as I say, before us. I expect an online safety, online harms bill in the coming months. I would say certainly this spring. The election, I would hold out, I suppose, as one legislative action, as I have the Election Act that we updated in the last Parliament. But I think the biggest change that parliamentarians have made, not just in Canada, but around the world, and I would highlight the work of the IGC on this front, is holding the big companies accountable, really taking them to task for their failure to act and failure to take the billions of dollars that they are earning every year and putting some of that major profit back into keeping their platform safe. I mean, that has paid dividends where we've seen Mark Zuckerberg and we've seen others fight tooth and nail against initiatives like the GDPR, fight to say, well, we don't need any regulation. We're fine the way we are. And now they're saying self-regulation is over. We are asking you to regulate us. And I think that change in tone has in part been because parliamentarians and colleagues around the world have really pushed to hold these companies accountable and elevated the public conversation. So I hope we can look back 10 years from now and say, here are the pieces of legislation that we put in place to really tackle this issue. But we are, as a world, I think, just coming to grips with the fact that we do need a new set of rules for our online reality, or at a minimum to ensure that the offline rules we've lived with properly apply online in a serious way.
Yeah, I would agree. I definitely think that I hope we're going to see more and more of such regulations coming up in the coming years. And we've talked about the UK and Europe as places where interesting things are happening. I think that the pressure is also really important. We have seen, for example, Facebook being much more active on the side of banning websites and groups that were denying the Holocaust after so many requests. Those requests, I feel, aren't happening necessarily as strongly and from as authoritative sources in the national parliaments very often when it comes, for example, to women and to abuse that women face. We have seen a lot more concern around the disinformation on COVID, and some action has been taken, maybe not enough, but some action has been taken by the platforms. We need the same level of concern, and we need to be much more vocal on the issue of online abuse and disinformation against women in politics for those same responses to happen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Presidente, creo que ya me pude conectar.
President, I have been able to connect myself.
Please,
This is
go right
Catalina
ahead.
Botero.
It's a pleasure. Go right ahead.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Gracias, muchas
Thank
gracias,
you.
presidente. Siento mucho la interrupción.
I apologize. 3 things. Vis-a-vis transparency, probably that is one of the most urgent needs from the great companies. If we had more transparency, it would be much easier to know what are the things that have to be done. And Facebook has committed itself. I'm sorry, but we've lost her again.
And again, Woodbridge, I wish to say this to the organizers.
Concreto en materia de cumpla con eso. Pero también es importante la transparencia.
It is a pity we're not able to get Ms. Botero's contribution today, but it then means, as was suggested earlier, we have to keep this conversation going. So I look forward to ParlAmericas organizing another session where we're able to hear from the subject matter experts again. I've seen so many persons in the chat who have commented that this has been an amazing session, that they've learned so much from our subject matter experts. Personally, I've been inspired, motivated, and encouraged by all of you. I've learned so much today, and I'm sure on behalf of all the Caribbean parliamentarians on the call, everyone from the Americas, this has been an amazing experience, very informative and eye-opening. We've heard the perspectives on all sides, and we've gotten suggestions on what we ought to do. And as President of the ParlAmericas has said to us, we have to work together. So to hear MP Erskine Smith say that Canada is having similar challenges to what we're having in our regions, it just cements the point made by President Ovalar that we have to work together. And if all of us work together and put forward a declaration and the position that we can agree to, I believe we will be able to make inroads and an impact on this issue of countering disinformation. So it has been a pleasure moderating for all of you today and a learning experience. I would like to turn over now to the Director General, Ms. Alicia Todd of ParlAmericas. And Director General, if you're ready, the floor is all yours. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Senator Henfield. And thank you for the excellent moderating. That was a wonderful panel, very engaged, always difficult when we're running against time, and lots of questions. And so I can commit on behalf of ParlAmericas that yes, for sure, we will continue to engage with this topic. I think I had already informed Mr. Enskine-Smith that the ParlAmericas Board of Directors had, because we participated in that Grand Committee meeting, we had members of the board join the Grand Committee meeting when it was held in Canada. Our board of directors had said that ParlAmericas should be following the work of the Grand Committee on a regular basis. And so if we can find a way to help create the sub-regional space for dialogue to feed up into the Grand Committee, we would be delighted to do so as an organization, I am sure. Thank you, Senator Henfield. We will move into the next part of this discussion now. It is now time for the presentation of results on open parliament commitments. This is the gathering of the ParlAmericas Open Parliament Network. And we are actually really about, it's a space for important dialogue, but also for taking action. And so we do have our, I'm sorry, somebody's entering here. Or it's my fault. I'll turn off my interpretation. We have commitments made by the parliaments on an annual basis on the actions they are taking towards opening their parliaments. We track these with our online commitment tool. And we use this space now to invite the member parliaments to come and report back to us. So I would like to then, without further ado, invite Senator Bertha Alicia Caravello Camarena of Mexico, who will be moderating this part of the agenda. Senator Caravello, the floor is yours. Senadora Caravello.
Ya está silenciada por la anfitrión. Ya no está silenciada, pero tal vez. Bueno, ¿sí?
La escuchamos, la escuchamos. Sí.
Sí, pues muy buenos días.
Good morning, Mexico, and good afternoon for you. I'm pleased to be here today with all of you to moderate this presentation of the results of the Open Parliamentary Networks adopted in the 4th Open Parliamentary Network meeting, and also to show the new commitments that the parliamentary delegations have agreed and that they will adopt this year. This is a practice that has been adopted by the Open Parliamentary Network to create a space for parliamentary delegations to share the work they are conducting in their national parliaments, to progress in the issues discussed in the different meetings throughout the years and other regional activities throughout the year as well. This allows us to learn from one another. It inspires us to develop more ambitious initiatives, and it also creates a mechanism to be responsible for the implementation of the principles we promote in this network. All of the commitments presented today will be integrated to the parliamentary commitment tools of the ParlAmericas. This tool allows the users to see, to compare, and to download and monitor the progress of the different parliaments in complying with their commitments to favor legislative openness. This is a very useful tool to assess the progress and the new proposals in this important issue. The ParlAmericas Secretariat We'll provide the link in the chat, the link for this tool. Each parliamentary delegation participating has designated a speaker that will have 3 minutes for a brief presentation. And the floor now will be taken by Senator Rosa Galvez from Canada. So I would like her to start. Senator Galvez, you now have the floor. Please go ahead. Here I am. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Galvez.
Colleagues of ParlAmericas, thank you for the opportunity to update on Canada's progress concerning open parliament initiatives. First, allow me to echo the comments of my colleague, Senate Speaker pro tempore, the Honorable Senator Pierrette Ranguet, and Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, the Honorable Bruce Stanton, in saying that the Parliament of Canada has been very happy to host the 5th gathering of ParlAmericas Open Parliament Network. I'm sure we can all agree that our conversation during last week's working session and today have been very important, very interesting, very informative, and mainly helpful as we as legislators try to combat disinformation. This morning, I want to provide an update on the Canadian section progress concerning our previous open parliament commitment and to announce our upcoming commitment. At the 4th gathering of the Open Parliament Network in Quito, Ecuador, in 2019, the Canadian section committed to developing a guide that will detail how an open parliament action plan for the Parliament of Canada could be co-created with civil society representatives. To accomplish this commitment, the Canadian section established a subcommittee on open parliament to begin their work. As the current chair of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to tell you that we have developed a draft roadmap for the creation of an open parliament action plan for the Parliament of Canada. In doing so, the subcommittee considered the Parliament of Canada's bicameral Westminster-style parliamentary system. We have identified practical and achievable steps we can take within our system to ensure the successful co-creation of Canada's first open parliament action plan. We are in the final stages of completing our roadmap, and I look forward to sharing more details once the Canadian section executive committee has an opportunity to review and adopt it. I also want to share with you Canada's next commitment on open parliament going forward. The Canadian section of Parliament and ParlAmericas will be present the roadmap to develop an open parliament action plan adopted by the executive committee of the Canadian section of ParlAmericans to the Senate of Canada and the House of Commons and make efforts to implement the concrete actions it identifies. Thank you for your kind attention, and I look forward to hearing about the progress being made in our legislatures. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Senator Galvez. I thank you for your words. And now, on behalf of the delegation of Colombia, Mr. Yesir Giraldo, Private Secretary of the Presidency of the House of Representatives of Colombia, has the floor. Mr. Giraldo, you have the floor. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Hello, Senator. Have a nice day to all of you. And it's a very good space in order to share all our points of view. Thank you all in Colombia. We are right now in the House of Representatives, and we have a meeting on the 5th open parliament meeting, and the approach we wanted to have was to deal with the interests of Afro-Colombian descendants. And we have a member of parliament who belongs to this group. So about the awareness of this group and their protection, this is a cross-cutting issue for us, especially on the Women's Day some weeks ago, and also gender approach. But we wanted to concentrate on the issue of African descendants, and this action plan has already been drafted in order to describe 5 areas for action. These 5 have to do with citizen participation, innovation. We are in a world of innovation. There's lots of things that have to do with the OECD. So we believe that citizen participation has to do more with renewal and with the participation social network. Then we also must support this with strategies based on resolutions. The second point has to do with transparency and the fight against corruption and increase the transparency in the parliament in order to share the activities of the parliament. You know that we live in a world of data, and there are data and statistics, and there are quantitative and qualitative data, and how do we account for what we have done? And also we have to consider that this is increased by the pandemic. So we also have to have a plan of action about a corporate probity and ethical approach. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giraldo.
And I now give the floor to the representative Isabel Cabezas from Ecuador. It is your turn.
Thank you very much, Berta. Thank you to everybody with us in this forum. Thank you also for this great opportunity to be able to update the different works that the different assemblies, parliaments, and congresses have engaged in with the aim of progressing in this open parliamentary network. I've prepared a very short presentation because I think it is relevant to clarify the important work and commitment that the National Assembly of Ecuador has conducted to comply with what right here in Quito in 2019 we agreed to. And very quickly, I want to say that the inclusion of this important principle of open parliament has been fundamental to reinforce the channels for the work we have done. Next slide, please. As a president of the National Assembly, and of course, as the president and vice president of ParlAmericas at the time, I definitely did consider that this open parliamentary work and this line of work were the main part of the transparency focal point and the way to show our information to our citizens. The Ecuadorian Parliament included this open parliamentary policy within the organic law for the legislative branch. We have created a group of parliamentaries who engaged in working in this very important issue. The open parliament policy in Ecuador is focused on transparency, access for public information, accountability, and finally, citizen participation, ethics of the parliamentarians. These 4 pillars have allowed us to definitely progress in the different commitments we have agreed to at the time, to install, irrespective of who is in parliament. That is, we want this to be a principle and an institutional policy. Such a relevant issue cannot be left to the will of one or two presidents, and we have continued with this, and we have had the commitment of the current president of the assembly, and there are some assembly members who have been re-elected, and I'm sure they will continue to drive this very important open parliament policy. In this country, we have progressed in 3 focal points that are very clearly defined here. One is reformulating the transparency and citizen participation model, which implies allowing that the information can be seen through technological tools. We have created some apps so that citizens can access to this information on their phones, and they can see the activities of the assembly members, they can see their profiles, and they can have all that information that is contained in a platform that can be accessed through all the existing technological means. This stage has progressed in 96%. This following action is to have an availability of this information through this technology. That is, we have agreed that all the sessions will be open, that we will be accessible through the technological tools, and especially they will be fully transparent, and all of this should be fully ethical. And finally, we have a system to monitor and assess the law. We have met 70% of our goals in this regard, and this system attempts to contribute to strengthening the roles of legislators as the ones who will guarantee the rights set down in the Constitution. And the laws that we approve should be applied, and this tool should help monitor this. Next slide, please. We have added the issue of changes in the organic law for legislative work so that the open parliament can be set already within the National Assembly platforms. Next slide, please. We have conducted important steps to implement this policy with an open parliament regulations or guide. And we have worked with institutions such as the Organization for Open Citizenship, and we will also have the observations of the National Democratic Institute, and we have also had the support, of course, of ParlAmericas. The rules contain a number of mechanisms that have been clearly established so that we can manage the relationship of the citizenship and the interests of the citizens with all the provisions and all the decisions adopted by the parliament, not only in terms of laws, but also in terms of operational and administrative steps made within the assembly. Next slide, please. We are sure that we are leaving an important legacy within the Ecuadorian Assembly. In my case, well, I did not run for a re-election process, but we are supporting an assembly member who will be 4 more years in the National Assembly, and she has been part of this open parliamentary network so that she can guarantee and she can work in favor of these important commitments and these important steps so that all of these can continue and that we can have an emphasis in their application. The great commitment of Ecuador to the future is to have this regulation for the implementation of open parliament in the National Assembly. And it will also have to be adopted by the board of directors so that all the assembly members can approve that this open parliamentary policy is finally set as a transparency policy for the legislative actions. Thank you very much. And once again, let me congratulate you for the work you are conducting. Thank you and congratulations.
Okay, we thank member of parliamentarian Cabezas. Thank you for your participation. Now we are going to give the floor to Mr. Enrique Illescas, who is the Vice President of the Congress of Honduras. Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to speak to you. I apologize for not opening my camera, but as there were delays, I'm just going to include my camera, but I will submit the results and the commitments of the Open Parliament. Currently, in my position, I am the president and creator of the political party Todos Somos en Honduras, and I'm also the vice president of the Committee of Finances and Citizen Protection and Energy. So I am a member of a series of committees where we deal with everyday issues in Honduras. Currently, the progress in the parliament are three. This National Congress has the support of Open Parliament that where we have 3 members. There's 3 men and 3 women where we have tried to establish a balance of gender representation. And we have trained in order the responsibilities. The sound of the representative has disappeared. It's impossible to interpret. I apologize. Yes, can you hear me now? Yes, now we can hear you. Yes, can you hear me now? Yes, we can. There was a problem in the of connectivity. So to be part of the commission, we have been able to be trained with the tools of citizen participation and openness, and during different spaces, we have stressed the importance of transparency of parliaments. In the whole region, most countries are participating in this. Secondly, a second progress is part of the Honduras Congress is to have tools not only at the committee level, but is also being extended to the different parties that are members of the parliament, which will allow us to meet the commitments that we will establish in the next cooperation program. And as regards tools for citizen participation, the role of openness that has to be provided to the citizens is achieved through the Office of Citizen Care. And it is I want to stress that the role of the executive is completely different from the legislative branch. In the legislative branch, we have representatives of different ideologies, while the executive is only responds to one party. We are not only opposition or for the executive, but the open parliament provides us with knowledge in order to try to fight against corruption and which is prevalent in our country and other countries. And within the National Congress, we have tried to identify the adjustments that can be introduced in order to make it easier for the citizens to approach parliamentarians, and so that the citizens will feel closer to their representatives. So the commitment of the National Congress of Honduras regarding open parliament is the issue of training in openness and the opening to civic participation. And this unfortunately has been impacted by 2 hurricanes and also the pandemic, but we will try to find mechanisms in order to help everyone to participate at the institutional level. Honduras has gone through a transition, and it is, we all know that we have been labeled as a narco state, but we are trying to change this outlook of our country because this impacts on our opportunities, and the open parliament has taught us how to acquire new knowledge and how we can share this feeling of democracy, integrity, principles and values that we already share, and we have strengthened them through ParlAmericas. So I am available to help you in anything I can. Thank you very much.
Enrique Yesca.
Thank you very much, Representative Enrique Illescas. We thank you for your participation. I will now give the floor to Representative Irma Davila Dazo, who is the chair of the Women Affairs Law. I'm sorry, she's the president of the Women Affairs Commission of the National Assembly of Nicaragua. You have the floor. Good morning. Thank you very much, and I'm sending you a big hug to all the ParlAmericas members. The National Assembly has been working in this effort, and we have created spaces and mechanisms to facilitate participation from the citizens. In Nicaragua, we have a policy to favor the participation of the people in parliamentary activity. We foster spaces for dialogue, participative dialogue between the people and their representatives in parliament through student visits in different levels from different organizations and institutions. We also provide conferences and talks within and outside the National Assembly to touch on different laws and their contents. We also explain the process to create the law and the requirements and mechanisms for the presentation of a new citizen law. We have also received visits, and we show them all around the facilities of the National Assembly, the Carlos Núñez Tellez facility that allows the people to know our facility and to be acquainted of the activities of this legislative branch. We also receive visits from foreign delegations that are interested in knowing the National Assembly and its activities. In the media, we explain the use of social networks, and the day-to-day activities of the Parliament. In the National Assembly, we have also conducted and promoted territorial meetings, implying that all the representatives move to a territory, a department, a municipality to hold solemn sessions or other legislative activities where we have approved different laws with the aim of providing the participation of citizens and a genuine approach between the assembly members and society, the different Nicaraguan families. These meetings will continue in 2021. As for access to public information, the Nicaraguan National Assembly represents an avant-garde effort to have information accessible for all the citizens. This legislative power has been considered an example of good practice of transparency in state management. We also have a parliamentary TV network that is actually a communication strategy promoting the institutional image for the disposal of different audiences at the national and international levels. We, the representatives, provide interviews that are broadcast at different times to give information to the Nicaraguan families and citizens. There are also educational shows for all the sectors. We also have a parliamentary library that has a database that allows us to have an exchange and an interaction between the national libraries and the citizens in general. And this is something new. Argentina made an effort in this regard, but ours is very new as well. We have approved a group of laws that we call the Nicaraguan Legislative Digest. And this compendium of laws includes all the laws we have adopted, the laws that are in force, the laws that are not in force, international tools, and those laws that have been modified or amended. And the National Assembly has put it at the disposal of the Nicaraguan families and citizens for free, so that they can share this legal certainty on the laws of these countries, which are the ones that can be used and which are the ones that are not in force anymore. We will continue creating a higher advocacy in parliamentary work, and we will also continue strengthening the communication bonds between the citizens and the representatives. These commitments will be perfected throughout time, and we will improve them in 2021. Thank you very much for this very interesting exchange that we will share with all the representatives in this parliament. I'm sending you a big hug.
Thank you, Representative Davila. We thank you for your participation. And now we give the floor to Representative Kenty San Luis from Suriname. You have the floor. Can you hear me?
Thank you. I thank you all. This was very interesting topics on today's meeting, and I will congratulate the ParlAmericas for this wonderful initiative. We have 3 commitments results, and I shall present this to you. Sessions with civil society organizations is still in process. We need to support communities and civil society organizations to work together in partnership and coalitions and to work constructively and cooperatively with the government. With regards to the Surinamese commitments to publish videos explaining the legislative process, I would like to inform you that the draft law has already been submitted to the parliament. However, the change of speaker and parliament, the law still needs to be discussed before it is passed. Professionals are already in place to make these videos. The last commitment, with regards to increased transparency via the parliament's website, I can inform you that the website is updated frequently with news message laws, meetings to be held, background info about the parliaments, etc. All the meetings have a live coverage on our National Assembly TV. The website even has a kids session. These are all the commitments, the results of our commitments, and we look forward to discuss this with you all. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, diputado Patrick.
Representative Patrick, we thank you, and we now have the Senator Jokima. Yes, she hails from Trinidad and Tobago. So we give you the floor.
Hello.
Hola.
Good morning. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be doing a presentation on behalf of the Honorable Speaker, Mrs. Bridget Anissa George, on the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and their achieved and projected commitments to the Open Parliament Network. So our Open Parliament commitments under the pillar of transparency, our commitment is that the Parliament is intended to strengthen its commitment to transparency by enabling public access to all committee information, to be achieved through the redesign of each committee's page on the Parliament's website to include the following information: written evidence from stakeholders, consultant reports, Hansard reports, minutes of meetings, committee reports, audio files, and video multimedia. Continuing under the pillar of transparency, our status, members of the public have access to most of the committee documents, material, but they are not all located on one single platform. Written evidence from stakeholders is available as appendices to committee reports. Consultants are seldom hired, but in that instance, when they are, their evidence or advice is incorporated into the committee's report. Hansard reports are available on an average within 3 days. However, this is dependent on the length of our meetings. Minutes of meetings are appended to committee reports. Committee reports are available on the website, usually within 48 hours of laying our presentation. Audio files can be accessed on the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Video multimedia can be accessed on the Parliament's YouTube channel as well. A summary of public hearings are prepared by the committee's office and posted on the website, usually within 3 days. Under our pillar of accountability, our commitment, the Parliament intended to strengthen its ability to hold the government to account for the status of laws that have been enacted by engaging in more post-legislative scrutiny. The standing committees were encouraged to individually commit to applying the 5 principles of post-legislative scrutiny: mandate, scope, participants, process, and timing to at least one act in 2019. Continuing under accountability, our status, the GSC on Finance and Legal Affairs has commenced an inquiry into the state's strategy for implementing unproclaimed legislation passed by Parliament during the past 20 years. The first public hearing pursuant to that inquiry was held on March 19, 2021. That inquiry represented one of the most comprehensive and deliberate investigations by a GSC into the implementation of legislation. The committee examined the Planning and Facilitation of Development Act 2014. Under our pillar of citizen participation, where we try to encourage greater involvement through online surveys, the Parliament intended to strengthen its engagement with citizens using online survey. In February 2019, the Parliament purchased SurveyMonkey's Advantage Plan, which allowed for an unlimited number of surveys to be simultaneously undertaken. This tool has been piloted successfully by 2 committees with surveys released on Facebook and WhatsApp that generated over 2,000 responses in the first 24 hours. All committees were encouraged to take full advantage of the plan. Our status, with the assistance of a parliamentary statistician, some of the departmental joint select committees successfully executed surveys which were commissioned mostly to gather a wide cross-section of views from the public and relevant stakeholders. At least 4 surveys were executed under the following themes: the efficiency and effectiveness of the National Ambulance Service, survey of convicted prisoners within the penal system of Trinidad and Tobago, survey of exporters and manufacturers, further to an inquiry into Trinidad and Tobago's performance in extra-regional trade, survey to gauge public perception of the transportation system and experiences with the traffic congestion. Our 2021 to 2022 ParlAmericas Open Parliament commitments, reporting on parliamentary expenditure. The Parliament commits to ensuring greater financial accountability through continued real-time monitoring of the annual budget by the Committee on Public Administration and Appropriations by submission of timely and detailed quarterly reports of the allocations and expenditure by the various departmental heads and agencies. Adoption 2021, our target is 2022, and this falls under our pillar of accountability. To improve youth participation in the Parliament commits to the restructuring of the National Youth Parliament to allow for the implementation of hybrid debates to facilitate ease of participation. Additionally, the Parliament intends to recommend to the Executive that youth papers, written perspectives from debates be taken into consideration for the drafting of legislation. Adoption 2021, our target is 2022, and this falls under our pillar of citizen participation. Utilization of survey tools. The Parliament endeavors to commit to improved utilization of survey tools to allow for increased citizen participation. It is intended that all committees will use these tools. Adoption 2021, target 2022, and this falls under our pillar of citizen participation. Thank you very much.
This is the interpreter. We are not getting any audio.
No se escuchó. Bueno.
Ahora le escuchamos, ahora sí.
Now we can hear you. All right. So if you did not hear me, let me thank Senator Yakima for her participation. And right now, we're going to give the floor to Representative Paulina Núñez from Chile. She has sent a video with her participation. Please, let's now play the video. Hello. I would like to thank you for this fifth network of the Open Parliamentary Network of ParlAmericas with the aim of reporting the progress of the commitments presented in the previous Open Parliamentary Network. And we also want to inform you of the new commitments in the Open Government Plan of Action. Countering disinformation to promote a responsible public dialogue in the plenary assembly is our commitment. From March 2020, the legislative process in Chile has not stopped, and there are public audiences with civil society and experts. The bicameral group that I chair continues with the third plan of action for the open parliament and as well as the new plan of action. As for the previous plan, I can inform you with respect to the proposal for the implementation of the budget office, this commitment was complied by presenting the proposal with the support of the World Bank. We have also opened the possibility to hire the chief for this support group. As for accountability and the format of voluntary accountability, the rules and the forms are ready. We have conducted a workshop with civil society and we have received their suggestions. We only need to approve this in the bicameral transparency work. Thirdly, the regional program for the executive power, we had a consultancy with the group and we have received the reports to orient the work of students and teachers on the work of the National Congress and on the importance of citizen participation, transparency, and access to information. We hope this can be integrated to the study plan of the last school years. Then, there will be materials that will be approved in schools, both for formal classes as well as informal visits of parliamentarians, and they will be approved there. As for the second plan of actions, there is one virtual Congress that aims at driving and having more participation using data analytics and having this support of collective intelligence. We have received support from the Inter-American Development Bank. We are also working on another project, which is integrity systems to have the library and others in the Senate, and we're also working together with the executive and legislative branch. We have conducted several workshops and technical roundtables for an open state. This was the first in Chile. Our commitments are creating a diagnosis for the legislative information. Together with civil society, we will have a design proposal so that it is interoperable with the web pages of the National Congress. We will improve usability and transparency and the legislative traceability. We will facilitate public consultation of this information with accessible formats. As for public information, we have different processes, and this is when the bicameral group for transparency plays a key role. We will have a rules for transparency and access for information for the Federal Congress and the Federal Congress Library to deepen the principle of transparency and access for information to the citizens. We also resumed an old commitment of the first plan of action to restructure and implement the website to facilitate access to transparent information, generating statistics and compliance indicators. Thank you very much and I hope to see you soon in person. Have a good day.
Yes.
Le escuchamos, senadora.
We can hear you. Thank you, Mrs. Núñez, for your presentation. And now we give the floor to Representative Ana Lucia Delgado from Costa Rica, who has sent a short video. So we ask the organization to put it forward, share it with us. Good morning. My name is Ana Lucia Delgado. I am deputy of the country, and I'm a first deputy, and I want to send you a greeting during this fifth gathering of the Open Parliament. Costa Rica has given large strides towards transparency and also accountability to generate probity and to include citizenry within the decision-making in the legislative. In 2015, we signed the commitment between the three branches of the country in order to meet those commitments. In 2019, we established the first national policy of open parliament in Costa Rica. This was done in order to meet a commitment that we had established, but also to promote an open state, which would lead to more accountability and transparency, and to have the tools in order to foster citizen participation. And we have a commission of open parliament made up by parliamentarians and also institutional representatives, executive representatives, and 3 representatives of the civil society, which were chosen through different mechanisms that were established through the regulation of this assembly. So on March 4, the Legislative Directorate approved the regulation for the participation of representatives of civil society and to foster cooperation, ethics, probity. This has to be the guiding principle of a parliament that has to have embedded an open parliament. Right now, the Department of Civic Participation, which is part of the Legislative Assembly, is coordinating with public resources in order to invite the 3 representatives of civil society in order to meet the commitments that we took on board in 2015 when we signed the agreement between the 3 branches of the government, but also in order to comply with the policies that were generated since 2019. I want to thank ParlAmericas for this space in which we can share the activities that Costa Rica does within the framework of open parliament. We hope to share all these progresses in all our hemisphere in order to foster transparency, accountability, and foster civic participation in all our parliaments. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure to speak to all of you.
Okay, so with the participation of Ana Lucia Delgado from Costa Rica, we will wrap up this presentation of results and commitments. So we would like to thank Ms. Delgado and all the other colleagues who have also taken the floor. Thank you very much. Please remember that the parliamentary delegation, which for some reason could not submit their commitments, you can send them to the International Secretariat of ParlAmericas so that they are included in the tool for commitments in ParlAmericas. We will therefore be able to build a robust and adequate repository to continue with our legislative openness. This is then the end of this session of result presentation for the different commitments of Open Parliament adopted in the 4th meeting of the Open Parliamentary Networks of ParlAmericas, and as well as for new commitments. Thank you very much. And once again, I will give the floor to Alicia so that she can continue with our program.
Senator Caravello, for taking us through that session. We are now moving along. I know we're running a little bit late, colleagues, so we'll move along, though I don't want to speed through this because I have wonderful news to announce. We have our executive committee for the Open Parliament Network. These are colleagues who take the leadership from across the sub-regions to help us in this, advance this work. And we have a transition in our presidency this year. Senator Blanca Ovelar, our outgoing president of the Open Parliament Network, who has been a huge champion for this work in the hemisphere over the last several years, as you know, is now president of ParlAmericas. And so she is stepping aside from her role as the president of the Open Parliament Network. But we are so excited to announce that we have Mr. Javier Macaya, the member of the Chamber of Deputies of Chile, who will be taking over as president of the Open Parliament Network for ParlAmericas. And so we are super delighted to continue our work with Mr. Macaya and have him in this leadership role. Moving along, the vice presidency of the Open Parliament Network also needs to be announced. We are delighted to welcome for the vice presidency for North America, our colleague, Senator Bertha Alicia Caravello Camarena, the senator from Mexico, who just helped us in the last session. She will be joining us as the first vice president for the North America for the Open Parliament Network. And she will be joined by the Honorable René Cormier, senator from Canada, who will be joining as the second vice president of the Open Parliament Network. We also have now joining us from from the Caribbean, following the slides here. I'm delighted to announce that Senator Renard Henfield will be coming back. He's been reelected to continue as vice president representing the Caribbean in the Open Parliament Network. Senator Henfield, we're very excited to continue having all of your support and enthusiasm in this role. We look forward to working with you. Moving next, we have the vice presidency for Central America. We're delighted to announce that it is going to be, yes, Ana Lucia Delgado Rosco from Costa Rica, who just gave us a presentation, as well as will be first vice president, and Corina Cano Cordoba from Panama will be joining as the second vice president of the Open Parliament Network representing Central America. And last but not least, for South America, we are delighted to announce that we will be having Wilma Piedra Andrade Munoz, asambleísta from Ecuador, will be joining to represent South America in the Open Parliament Executive Committee. So lots of work to be done. Lots of work to be done on many, many themes and topics, and we look forward to working with this amazing new committee of parliamentarians who have just joined the Open Parliament Network Executive Committee. So a round of applause for everybody. We look forward to working with you. Now, I need to move us into the reading of the declaration, and then we will hear remarks from the new president of the network. So I would like to move us directly into the reading of our declaration. I would like to invite Senator Rosa Galvez of Canada to take over this part of our program. Senator Galvez, I pass the microphone or the floor to you.
Muchas gracias, Alicia.
Thank you very much, Alicia. I'm very pleased to join you in reading the final declaration of these Open Parliamentary Networks, entitled Countering Disinformation to Promote Responsible Public Discourse. In consonance with the spirit of ParlAmericas,
intercalada en los 4 idiomas oficiales de la organización. Así, invito al honorable diputado Mansur Nadir, presidente de la Asamblea Nacional de Guyana, para que dé inicio a la lectura en inglés. Presidente Nadir, tiene usted la palabra. Presidente Nadir.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, your microphone's off. Can you please? Perfect.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. We, parliamentarians representing 26 countries in the Americas and the Caribbean, met virtually on March 15th, 19th, and 26th, 2021, with the support of the Parliament of Canada for the 5th gathering of ParlAmericas Open Parliament Network, entitled Countering Disinformation to Promote Responsible Public Discourse. The dissemination of digital disinformation and computational propaganda through new communication technologies has had harmful effects with multiple manifestations and consequences, including the proliferation of hate speech, undue interference in electoral processes, limits to political participation, delegitimization of government's actions and campaigns, and the deterioration of democratic dialogue, which threatens peace and security. Through the gathering, we participated in dialogues about the serious effects of disinformation on national security, democratic institutions, and human rights, exchanged good legislative practices to mitigate its consequences, and considered key issues to guide our parliamentary work. Considering the above and recognizing, one, that the consolidation of phenomena related to digital disinformation, computational propaganda, and the ubiquity of new technologies and platforms have had harmful effects, the multiple manifestations of which challenge national sovereignty, governability, security, and democratic stability, as they have the potential to affect the integrity of electoral processes, undermining public trust in democratic institutions, and exacerbating political and social polarization. Two, that the magnitude, power, and global nature of large technology companies require coordinated legislative initiatives between countries designed to safeguard the interests and protection of users and consumers, always in adherence to the highest standards of transparency and integrity. Three, that given the state of the digital economy and digital markets, it is necessary to consider novel legislative approaches that build ethical business practices and prevent the deepening of existing monopoly models and anti-competitive practices. Four, that the protection of personal data and privacy is an important public policy area that imply, among other actions, guaranteeing the right of all persons to know, update, and rectify any information collected about them in public or private databases or files, as well as applications and social media platforms with which they interact. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Presidente Nadir. Ahora cedo la palabra a la asambleísta Ana Belén.
Thank you, President Nadir. I will now give the floor to Assembly Member Ana Belén Marín so that she can continue with the reading in Spanish. Go ahead, Assembly Member Marín. Thank you, Rosa. Good afternoon to you all. As always, it is very good to be in contact with you in this very important day and to be able to read the document that we have agreed. Please give me a few minutes.
De acuerdo, entonces vamos a iniciar.
All right, so let's start.
Declaratoria del quinto encuentro de la Red de Parlamento Abierto de ParlAmericas, contrarrestando la desinformación para promover
Countering misinformation for a responsible public dialogue, March 2021.
parlamentarios y parlamentarias de los 26 países.
Parliamentarians of the 26 countries of the Americas and the Caribbean. We have met virtually on the 15th, 19th, and 26th March 2021 with the support of the Canadian Parliament on the occasion of the fifth Open Parliamentary Network of ParlAmericas entitled Countering Disinformation to Promote a Responsible Public Dialogue. Digital disinformation and computational propaganda through new technologies for communication has had deleterious effects, and their multiple manifestations and consequences influence in the proliferation of hate speech. The undue interference in electoral processes, limits for political participation, delegitimation of governmental actions, the impoverished dialogue that threatens peace and security. In this meeting, we will participate in dialogues in terms of the serious effects of national security, the democratic institutions, and human rights. We have exchanged good legislative practices to mitigate their consequences, and we consider key issues to orient our parliamentary work. Considering the above and the information, we have recognized the following.
Información digital, la propaganda computacional y la irrupción constante de nuevas tecnologías y plataformas han tenido efectos nocivos, cuyas múltiples manifestaciones desafían la soberanía.
Have had harmful effects, the multiple manifestations of which challenge national sovereignty, governability, security, and democratic stability, as they have the potential to affect the integrity of electoral processes, undermining public trust in democratic institutions, and exacerbating political and social polarization. That the magnitude, power, and global nature of large technology companies requires coordinated legislative initiatives between countries designed to safeguard the interests and protection of users and consumers, always in adherence to the highest standards of transparency and integrity. That given the state of the digital economy and digital markets, it is necessary to consider novel legislative approaches that build ethical business practices and prevent the deepening of existing monopoly models and anti-competitive practices. Fourth, the protection of personal data and privacy is an important public policy area that implies, among other actions, guaranteeing the right of all persons to know, update, and rectify any information collected about them in public or private databases of files, as well as applications and social media platforms with which they interact. Fifth, that the deployment of digital disinformation campaigns orchestrated with the objective of interfering in the development of transparent and democratic electoral processes is one of the most serious threats to the sovereignty and national security of several countries in the region and the world. Sixth, the online gender-based violence and gender disinformation, which can particularly affect credibility and the public trust in those who are active in policies and in the public sphere, and can silence or minimize women's contributions and ultimately exclude them from decision-making spaces. Seventh, that there are disinformation campaigns designed to infringe the human rights of persons and communities in vulnerable situations, such as migrants, persons with disabilities, LGBTQI persons, ethnic and racialized groups, and other historically marginalized groups, further limiting spaces for the political participation. Eighth, that it is the duty of states to guarantee the right to free expression and to promote a favorable environment for unrestricted, independent, and diverse communication, advocating for a culture of peace and encouraging consensus and cooperation among actors and the political system. Ninth, that it is necessary to address the proliferation of hate online speech, especially on social media, which generates various consequences, including by exacerbating political polarization and human rights violations. Tenth, that the era of digital communication has created serious challenges for independent journalism as objective and reliable source of information that is of singular importance in democratic systems. 11, that the international multilateral organizations such as the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and the Open Government Partnership, among others, as well as spaces for global cooperation such as the International Grand Committee on Disinformation, have been working on initiatives and recommendations to address the phenomenon of disinformation by offering tools to different stakeholders to mitigate its effects. 12, that new information and communication technologies, ICTs, also offer tools and resources to counteract the effects of disinformation and strengthen fundamental principles for democracy, such as openness, transparency, and social accountability. 13, that parliaments around the world are developing innovative legislation to confront the phenomenon of digital disinformation and computational propaganda, including aspects related to ethical processing and use of information, as well as unrestricted respect for the rights of political participation and freedom of expression. 14th, that in the design of artificial intelligence and computational algorithms, there are biases and patterns of discrimination that affect and exclude historically marginalized groups from full participation in the digital world. 15, that state openness and particularly legislative openness is essential to guaranteeing transparency, access to public information and integrity, as well as the involvement of all key actors to combat this phenomenon, especially through commitments and action plans created jointly between parliaments and society. Therefore, we commit to 1, Ana Maria. Ana Belén, I'm now going to give the floor to Alicia because I think that there are other participants who have to read other fragments in other languages. Alicia, could you please explain?
Ana Belén, we are now going to move to have the reading in a different language. I think we're moving on to French now.
Yes.
But then Speaker Nader, just so you understand, there was a problem with interpretation during the English reading, so this has made it better so all of the Spanish colleagues could catch up on the declaration. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's it. The first part.
Gracias, Ana Belén. El turno corresponde.
Thank you, Ana Belén. And now I give the floor to my colleague, Senator René Cormier, who's going to read in French. Senator Cormier. Thank you, Senator Galvez. Can you hear me well? So we commit to convene our governments, the media, civil society organizations, social movements, and technology companies to agree on actions to safeguard the integrity and transparency of electoral processes in our countries, bearing in mind the increasingly sophisticated strategies of digital disinformation and computational propaganda, and in adherence to international standards of for freedom of expression and fundamental right in democratic societies. Propose measures that encourage large technology and communication companies to strengthen their contribution to societal well-being by implementing social responsibility practice. Oversee the implementation of existing legislation or develop new legislation to address the consolidation of monopoly models in the information and communication technology sector, to respond to anti-competitive practices that have facilitated dominant positions in digital markets. We promote international collaboration among governments of our region, and particularly among the legislative branch, to enable coordinated responses that include recent advances in cybersecurity and data protection in light of the globalized systemic nature of disinformation. We insist on the need to promote debates and establish or designate legislative committees dedicated to addressing the phenomenon of disinformation, raising public awareness of its consequences, and developing policies. We develop legislative initiatives that consider hate speech against women, girls, migrants, historically marginalized groups, and promote fundamental democratic values for social coexistence, such as equality, non-discrimination, political plurality, and intercultural understanding, in alignment with Sustainable Development Goal 5. And we urge our governments to promote a free and plural communications environment that recognizes the importance of independent journalism, the diversity of media, and civic spaces as opportunities and allies in countering disinformation and propaganda, thereby promoting just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Cormier. And now it's the turn of Margaret Coelho from Brazil, who will complete the reading of this declaration.
Diputada, não te escuta.
Desculpe. Bom, eu inicio cumprimentando a senhora
I would like to congratulate Ms. Rosa Galvez and thank her for the opportunity to participate in this important event. This is one of the most important issues right now. Disinformation cannot be an enemy of democracy. It needs to be combated effectively because it strengthens democracy and it is a tool for inclusion, and it should not be an instrument for disinformation. I will continue then with our commitment. Promote the collaboration between the Ministries of Education or their equivalent, civil society, student organizations, and educational institutions to foster initiatives designed to strengthen critical thinking, digital literacy, and cybersecurity practices. Strengthen and update data collection laws in accordance with the highest international standards on the matter that acknowledge the importance of principles of quality, legality, purpose, and proportionality in the collection, transfer, and use of personal data, and communicate the public their rights and guarantees in a transparent manner. Seek the adoption of legislation to guarantee the right access of public information and promote the proactive disclosure of governmental and parliamentary information as an element to encourage evidence-based public debate, using as references the ParlAmericas roadmap towards legislative openness and the Legislative Transparency Toolkit, jointly developed by the Transparency and Access to Information Network, Eurosocial, and ParlAmericas. Advance the discussion on the importance of adopting ethical principles in the development of computational algorithms under democratic, transparent, and inclusive paradigms. Reaffirm our duty to promote responsible public discourse in our parliaments and in our in-person and virtual public interactions, employing respectful, inclusive and tolerant communication practices that foster constructive dialogue and recognize the value of political plurality in our societies. Develop or modify legislation and call on governments and the private sector to promote the design of artificial intelligence and computational algorithms and the democratic, transparent, inclusive, and ethical paradigms to avoid discrimination and disparate impact. Continue to strengthen spaces for exchange and the best parliamentary practices at the level of parliamentarians, as well as parliamentary staff, who are key in ensuring the effective implementation and sustainability of efforts in favor of legislative modernization and use of ICTs that allow for increased and improved interaction with the public. Adopted March 26, 2021. Thank you very much, Representative Coelho. This is the conclusion of the reading of the fifth meeting of the Open Parliamentary Network of ParlAmericas, countering disinformation to promote a responsible public dialogue. I would like to highlight that the declaration reflects the dialogues that we have engaged in the meetings last week, and it has been shared with the Executive Committee of the Open Parliamentary Network, the Parliamentaries Council, the Canadian Parliament as a host, and with all the delegates. We have included all the contributions received. If any parliamentary delegation has objections or additions or proposals, and they have not had the possibility to inform the ParlAmericas Secretariat before this meeting, I would invite you to raise your hand right now.
Yes, Alicia. Yes, sorry. Well, Senator, I'm not seeing hands up. I would like to just, if we could pause that for a moment and move to inviting Diputado Macaya, because he has to unfortunately leave and he is our incoming president. So can we invite him to come and take the floor? And then we can just go back and make sure there's no other comments on the declaration. Okay?
Sure. Okay.
Perfect. Diputado Macaya, a você.
Deputy Macaya.
In fact, I am very delayed for my next meeting. Thank you very much. I will give my first speech in Spanish. Yo soy miembro del Congreso en Chile.
I am a member of parliament in Chile. I'm a president of UDI, my party, and it is for me an honor. And I thank you for trusting in me this important role in open parliament since many years ago, and there's been great progress made in the last years, and the 4 pillars that ParlAmericas and the Open Parliament has had in our country. In 2012, we signed the Declaration of Santiago to create this OPN, whose main goal was to recover public trust in the legislative branches and to improve the standards of open government. And this was an individual effort of parliamentarians who undertook their individual efforts, and they just frittered away because they were scattered. And the current Minister of Justice of our country, Mr. Larraín, accepted the invitation of the ParlAmericas. He was a Minister of Justice, and he accepted the idea of this OPN and has access to tools and important subjects that are implemented in other countries. We have to stress the importance of this network, not only by parliamentarians, but also by the staff and officers of different parliaments. Their role is very important. I would like to thank especially Blanca Ovelar, who was the leader of this OPN since 2018. She worked very strenuously in order to continue with the work of Director Larraín, who was preceded her. And I also would like to thank the Secretariat of ParlAmericas for their active work that is fully committed, 1000%. Thank you for your smiles and all the different activities. So thank you very much. And we thank Alicia, Nabela, Natalie, Alvaro, Emily, and all the team. And we hope that the next 20 years will continue to show the same achievements. I also want to congratulate the parliamentarians who shared their commitments in times of crisis and with lots of work to do to work on these subjects. It's not easy because we have lots of work due to the pandemic, but we have to continue forging ahead with the open parliament concept in order to support civil society, for them to participate and to have trust in our activities, because this will generate legitimacy. So in this fifth gathering, I would like the debate on disinformation, the power of the legislative branch in order to counteract it, is critical, and we have to deal with it this year in order to recover the trust in the legislative branch so that we become a trustworthy source of information. And we have to see how to counteract disinformation, who wants to take advantage of the feelings and grievances of people in order to disseminate disinformation, whether it is Russian participation, Cambridge Analytica, have participated and tried to influence, and this kind of devices play an important role. And due to the pandemic, these devices and social networks have people connected more time, and so right now our work has been replaced by screens. So many people who are connected to screens and consume information, they also consume disinformation. And some people say that sometimes things are a process of governments who have decided to harm the people. So this is not local. This has to be done at the global level. It's not so much about going to war with the technology companies, but we have to exchange information about disinformation and the different aspects of lack of overview as a crime of the dissemination of disinformation. So we have to have a law in order to protect data with a safeguard commission, and this has to be dealt with at the parliaments in order to control the dissemination of disinformation and to develop new paths in order to combat against it. So I know that the network has more initiatives in the future. We have worked trying to learn a lot from others, so we're not going to start from scratch. We will know which are the positive and negative lessons that can be learned. Unfortunately, today I cannot say that I wish you safe travels, because right now our meetings are digital. I hope that the sixth meeting will be face-to-face. I thank you very much, and I thank the organizers for trusting me, and I congratulate the work of my predecessor, and I hope to be as good as she was.
I hope the next meeting will be face-to-face in the sixth next meeting of our assembly. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Diputado Macaya. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Senator Galvez, I mean, we can turn to see, I had no hands. I saw no hands come up requesting.
Entonces, como no hay nadie que ha levantado la
So, all right, since there are no hands up, then if there are no contributions and there's no input and no comment, I would like to inform that the declaration has been adopted. Thank you all. I would like to invite Alicia to continue with the program. Alicia, please go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Galvez, very much for that. Perfect. You know, it was such an enriching dialogue on disinformation that we kind of ran late on our timing. So thank you to everyone who managed to stay with us for the duration of the meeting. I do need to announce that we will be launching now what is our survey. This is a way for us to just capture some information from you about the meeting, your feedback to us. It takes just a couple of seconds. And so if you could please it'll pop up for you here. Please do answer it. This is very important for our work to continue to tailor our work for you. The Portuguese and the French versions will be shared in the chat. So if you want to read it in French or Portuguese, there's a link in the chat and you can do the survey there. It really takes a couple of minutes. I would be grateful for all of you to please answer these questions for us. Wonderful. Well, seeing as we are, I see as the survey is being finalized there. Thank you, colleagues, for everyone for your participation in that for us. And yes, the evaluation provided there was in English and Spanish for colleagues. If you please look, the Spanish is written there too. Well, this brings us to the end of our, what a rewarding meeting. Madam President Ovelar, is it okay if we close the meeting, or would you like to say anything as we conclude here?
Yo creo que es momento, Alicia, Estamos
I
llegando al final.
believe, Alicia, we are reaching the end of an unforgettable meeting. Our gathering has new authorities, and after listening to Deputy Representative Makaya, I have much more expectations. I see that he's young and he's full of ideas, and he will take up what was born in Chile, Larraín. So he's the second Chilean who's going to head the OPN. I am very thrilled to say, to wish him very, very well. This session has been very long. We've learned a lot, but it is a challenge for all. And in ParlAmericas, we'll continue to deepen these ideas. I thank all the staff, our parliamentarians, the officers of parliaments, and I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Un abrazo, Blanca. Chao. Saludos a todos.
Gracias desde México. Felicidades por
Gracias,
el
que les vaya
trabajo.
muy bien.
Thank you, everyone. And that
Alicia, muchas gracias por todo, Rosa Galvez.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So wonderful to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye from Guyana.
Thank you, speaker.
Nice to see you.
Muchas gracias y muchos saludos desde México a todos y a todas.